Okay, welcome everybody to the Town Board work session of Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019. We're starting off with a presentation from Barton and Judas. So, regarding the chap line, we have a couple of members of the chap line committee here. Thank you guys for coming. And the floor is yours.
Can I make a request just so everybody knows who everybody is? Can we just go around the table so...
That's what I was about to. I'll start. I'm Lee Jones with Barton and Judas. And here's our team, our project team, and you guys are on this as well. And this is Ryan White. Sorry, Ryan.
That's right, she introduced me. So I'm the project engineer for the project.
Okay.
I'm Ivy Poole, I'm a member of the town board. Lisa Katz, town board.
Rob Greenstein, Town Supervisor.
Jeremy Slang, Town Board.
Jack Mortel, Chapline member.
Stuart Bieber, Chapline member.
Peter Izzo, Chapline member.
Anyone else?
Oh, that's Holland.
Oh, Acosta.
Oh.
Town Board member.
Graduate.
Oh,
Graduated?
I graduated.
Introduce yourself for the...
Oh, hi, I'm a town board member.
All right.
Okay.
Shall we begin?
All right, great. So again, I'll go back to the agenda. We already covered the team. We're gonna go over the background of the project and just the objectives. Talk about the location and the limits of the project. Look through some existing conditions and our preliminary concepts. The idea tonight is just to give you an update of where things stand. We've met with the town and with some of the focus groups, and are continuing to do that as we move forward with this project.
So as you know, we've seen a lot of you folks before during our interview and at different project meetings. So this is all familiar to you. But basically, 1.5 mile long trail to connect downtown Chappaqua, the Bell School, all the way up to Horace Greeley, Chappaqua Crossing. We're following the Metro North Harlem line there, the sawmill on the eastern side of the tracks. And then also the county trunk line, which you'll see on some of our graphics here and up on the screen. I know we've got some representation on the chap line from adjacent private property owners and from the Chestnut Oaks community, so those are big parts of this feasibility study looking at this trail. And then also we've got a lot of wetlands, which you'll see and we'll discuss a little bit more about. So that's kind of the background information going into the project that we're looking at during this kind of alternative analysis phase.
And then over here are just the boards that are up here. They'll be on the screen as well, and we'll walk you through the concept. But at the southern portion here is Chestnut Oaks, and then it's following north up to Roaring Brook Road, where Chappaqua Crossing and Horace Greeley High School is.
Can I just, can I ask you to take sort of a step back for a second, just for those of us who haven't been involved
Okay.
in the conversations you've had state, where are you in terms of this project? What are we being presented here tonight? Is this the results of your feasibility study,
so
or
this is-
are you at a certain milestone in the project?
We're still studying routes and alternatives, and we're creating a feasibility study to evaluate the best route to go through this 1.5 mile stretch. There
So
are
the
different
purpose of tonight
constraints
is what?
to update you on where we are and tell you what our findings are to date, but we don't have any recommendations at this time. We are
Okay.
just still presenting what we have found
Got it.
out to
Okay,
date.
thank you.
Yep.
And to get feedback from you guys
Absolutely.
on, so what we're showing here is we've already eliminated some alternatives, and we can allude to those as we go through, but there's still a number of alternatives we're looking at. And those are gonna be factors that are beyond an engineering feasibility. There's cost involved, there's, other factors involved, that's kinda, what we wanna touch on so that you're aware of those moving forward.
Very preliminary, let me put it that way.
Yes.
We didn't want to get too far ahead of ourselves without bringing the town board along to where we were so that you could help us inform the decision as to what alternatives and which pathway to go, which is why also the chapline committee's here, because it was really important that we be able to present to both of you.
Got it. I just wasn't, based on what was in the packet, I wasn't clear that that was the point.
Yeah,
So,
no, thank you.
Thank you.
So these are just a couple overview images to kind of orient you to the project. This is the mapping that was provided by the town during the RFP phase. So you'll see, some of the mapped wetlands from the state, the sewer trunk line, And then even on the aerial here, you can kind of follow that sewer trunk line and kind of those key points that we're trying to connect. And it really, kind of illustrates that the goal is to get from here to here.
You can see on this aerial where this is the trunk line, you can see the cleared area. And so basically, we're just making this connection along that line. And not necessarily staying exactly on that line, but following that north to south connection.
So moving south to north from Chestnut Oaks up to Roaring Brook, we wanted to share some pictures because it can get a little knotty back there, so I'm not sure how many of you folks have been really back literally in the weeds. We found that out the hard way, how dense it is back there. But, so this is the southern end at Chestnut Oaks, and this is kind of where the wooden screening fence begins. To orient you, and then here we are on the other side of the screening fence. So this is on Metro North, right along the property line there, with the buttresses and so on, and you can kind of get that orientation from the tracks. The right-of-way here is about 60 foot offset the eastern line, so it's right in that comfort zone is where the private property line is there.
Oh, there is. It's larger than I thought.
Yeah, so it's the old valuation map show on the track closest to Chestnut Oaks, 60 foot offset, and we'll zoom in on that area and talk a little bit more about what that means in terms of Metro North in a few slides.
Yeah, because this is one of those situations where you can see we have the green line and the purple line. This Chestnut Oaks area is one of those cases where we're looking at two different alternatives of, it doesn't work on the TV screen.
Yeah.
The one on the far right, the side that would end up being off and on Metro North properties. So there are obviously costs and situations involved with working with Metro North to get an easement for that. And then the other one is looking at using a bike easement that goes to Chestnut Oaks now, which would then keep us off Metro North property. So again, these are just things along it that we are analyzing and discussing with the groups.
So as we move north, we then we get back onto town-owned property, but there's quite a few delineated wetlands. So one of the tasks completed since the last time we saw most of you folks is our environmental scientist was out in the field, delineated the wetlands. So you'll see those on the maps here, and those are the delineated limits that will inform kind of the permitting process and whether we're going to have wetland impacts or not. But this really, it's a nice stretch once we finally find a way to get back into here. There's a couple nice streams that you can make out, nice vegetation, a good habitat area, really kind of little oasis where you wouldn't expect one. So we, coming upon this, we were pretty excited about, having this along the trail line. I think it could be a really big asset for the trail itself. And then we move along to what's shown on the second sheet there, where we get out of the wetlands, and then the sewer trunk line kind of takes a higher route. It does pass through some private property. And you can see, based on the improvements that were done in 2007, 2008 by the county, that a lot of the trunk line is still cleared of vegetation. So that's depicted in these images. And then this is when we get past the high school, where we have the gorge and the aerial crossing of the sewer line. And then last, we have along Roaring Brook. So this is these two images are generally where the trail would come out to avoid other privately owned property. And then this is all the way up at South Farm Road, the entrance to the high school, and then at the new intersection there. So, kind of showing the side that we'd be following with the trail line.
And now we'll take you back to the beginning to walk through the concepts and the things that we've been evaluating.
Yeah, so as Lee mentioned, these are all here, and we're, these boards, we can leave them so you guys can really study them and ask us questions after the fact. But this sheet, the first sheet, kind of covers from all of the Chestnut Oaks property. And here we're showing two different alternatives at this time. And those are summarized by the green line, and there's a there's a yellow hatching that doesn't seem to show up too well on the screen here, unless you're closer, but there's an existing 20-foot wide bike easement that was executed back when Chestnut Oaks was developed. So that is that bike easement that the town now owns. However, that follows the curb line of the street. And then there's kind of a bit more of a parky area in the middle here that bike easement follows. The purple line is an alternative route that follows behind the wooden screening fence that's there now. So you can see here that there's the property line for Metro North. That purple line would jog back and forth from Metro North property. In the center here where the fence butts in a little, there's wetlands on the other side, so we'd have some wetlands to work around there. But those are the two alternatives in summation going through Chestnut Oaks, is there's one following the existing easement, or one behind the fence that would require coordination with Metro North. And I think the next slide gives you a little more zoomed in view. So again, kind of the green alternative following along here, the purple alternative following along here. And should we go on Metro North property, obviously coordination is going to have to take place with Metro North. You know, from our preliminary conversations with them, they would require additional fencing between the trail and the rail line. We are in these areas where we get the closest, about 49, 48 feet, right in about that 50-foot buffer area, which does, you know, we'd have to go through the word they use. It's not encroachment, but.
We have to look
Variance.
at an easement, or at least a
Essentially,
long-term lease we
long-term
need to
lease,
require, the
yes.
town would need to require a long-term lease.
So there are some additional cost considerations with going on Metro North. We would be, you know, skirting the wetlands, and then also having to look at that wood screening fence, because these buttresses that are holding up the fence, the trail would be going right along here so as to avoid wetland impacts.
How long is that fence?
The fence, so the purple length, the trail, we would have about 1,200 foot of retaining wall to avoid wetlands, and then I think it's about 2,000 foot of fencing required. So about 2,000 foot is the portion that we'd be jogging back and
1,200
forth.
feet of retaining walls and 2,000 feet of fence.
Yes.
I'm sorry, you probably said this clearly and I just didn't understand. On the green option,
Yep.
is that, does that then go on the other side of the screening fencing? So it actually does go through Chestnut Oaks?
Yes, so
Okay.
essentially what it does in the straight stretch here that's kind of North Greeley, but it is part of Chestnut Oaks property. From, is it Bischoff Ave?
Correct.
Up. It follows the center line of the easement. It's a 20-foot easement. The center line follows the edge of pavement, so the curb line. So we're looking at about a 10-foot wide trail, so that you can have two-way use. So, you know, the easement, if you actually go out there and take a look, it's 10 foot on either side of the curb line. Then once you get into this more park-like setting, it actually shifts so that the entire 20-foot easement is off the road. And then when it comes down here, they just shoot right across the cul-de-sac, and then parallel the sewer trunk line as it goes along the.
So I'm sorry, just one, so the green is always inside Chestnut Oaks fencing?
It's always inside that fence.
Okay, so it doesn't jog in and out?
Right.
Okay,
So
got it.
that
would-
fence is pretty much right along the Metro North property line.
Okay.
So it's really one side or the other, Metro North or not Metro North.
Okay. All right.
Now, you know, with
Thank
that in mind, and the screening fence and the property line, and the edge of parking down by the cul-de-sac here are all very close. And since the easement kind of cuts right across the cul-de-sac, we have to, you know, if that's the route that's chosen for the most part, or preferred, when that decision comes, that area there, we'd have to look at some design solutions so as to not cut straight across the cul-de-sac.
Just some clarity.
Yep.
The distance to the Metro North is 49 to 50 feet, you said, in some spots?
Generally.
And that's not inclusive of the actual trail itself? That would be the perimeter of the trail to Metro North, or is that inclusive
So,
of?
the trail. The trail would be within the setback, what he's saying.
So the property line is 60 foot off the eastern track center line. but what Metro North measures is for certain permitting requirements is 50 foot from the edge of the track. So we lose half of the track there, and then we're gonna have a 10-foot wide trail, and then some buffer area with fencing. So we're gonna be, yes, essentially, we get to be within about 50 foot of the edge of the track.
Okay, then the other question is, and I'm sorry if you've answered already, how often have you dealt with Metro North in any project that you've done in terms of their willingness to be partners and also in terms of their costs?
I have not personally worked with them, but one of our colleagues actually just worked, she was working and employed by Metro North, so she's been helping us to understand this whole process. And they do work with you, but it can be a very long process, and it can be a costly process as well. They require a lot, any construction within their property requires a flag person on site during construction, and all these costs add up, and then obviously the long-term lease and getting that paperwork done. So while it's possible, it adds a large chunk of time on the project as well as additional costs.
So knowing the distance and the amount of space we're gonna need, I think that could be a relatively easy preliminary question, you may not get the exact number, but knowing that we need X amount of frontage on their property, can we get a ballpark from them so that we're not wasting time, for example, if it comes out with some ridiculously absurd number?
Yes, that's gonna be a part of our feasibility study, and you guys will, because we're evaluating that right now, because even in addition to being on Metro North property, if I go back, we'll be within, no, this doesn't wanna work, or am I doing it the wrong way?
No, it's just not showing.
In the wetlands, you can see up there, the purple line goes towards that blue hatch, and that's gonna require some retaining walls as well, that is additional cost. So that just the construction of the trail, there are added costs, as well as the added cost of the 6-foot-high chain link fencing that Metro North will require, because we'll be on the opposite side of the existing fence, it's their barrier fence. So yeah, so all those will absolutely be in there, so you guys can compare the true additional cost. And as you can see, the proximity of the purple and green line and a chunk of it, they're really not that far away from each other, that in terms of the relationship with Chestnut Oaks, it's very similar, so.
Now, if it was the Chestnut Oaks, inside this Chestnut Oaks fence, would you still need a retaining wall and?
We would not.
No. You
would
So
not,
that
so-
area
Because we're far enough away from the wetland.
where the existing wood screening fence would remain, and then we would kind of be in that grassy area along the curb line. So the cost would be essentially the trail only, and then any landscaping improvements.
And can you just confirm the entirety of this green that we're seeing on this slide
Yes.
is all subject to a current easement?
So
wanna
from what we've been provided, we have not, had a property line survey done at this point of the project, but the approved site plan for Chestnut Oaks, and then the actual filed easement that was filed at the county clerks, that is what that is depicting.
Okay.
And it permits an entrance and exit on both sides? Or is it an easement in? Is there an easement
So
to the other end of the property?
Yes, it extends to the northern end of the
Sorry,
property.
yeah, to the town, which is town property.
Onto the town property?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Exactly.
And there's no way one could create a hybrid of these if someone was so inclined? Meaning-
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's what we have to look at in this cul-de-sac area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is
Cul-de-sac
some
would
sort of
fall.
hybrid. Now, the kind of item in that hybrid scenario is, once we cross onto Metro North property, we incur additional permitting timeline costs, et cetera. So, whether that's a short area or the entire length, there's gonna be a give and take on that, but it does, once we step onto their property for even 10-foot of trail, it's gonna trigger that process.
That extra cost, yeah.
But yes, I think a hybrid is very possible, and frankly, even for the green line that's shown following the easement, likely going to be necessary at the north end of the trail there.
What type of hybrid, I'm trying to understand.
As in
Well,
not
there's
follow
two-
the green line completely or not follow the purple line
Basically
completely.
saying
We
don't
could go in
follow,
between.
don't follow the easement, hug
Right.
the edge of the road.
Yeah, so in this area, you know, at the end
But it's
here,
still
there's some parking
inside.
off to the
Still
side.
inside.
So I think what we preliminarily
Or exit.
discussed is
Just go in and out around.
keeping the trail around the edge of the cul-de-sac, redesigning that cul-de-sac
know.
interaction such that it preserves the parking area for Chestnut Oaks, but it doesn't interfere with traffic, so that it would kind of skirt around here and then go along the.
And I think also in that grass area, we could hug back along the fence to keep the lawn area
Yeah, I
on
almost
their
feel like you
side.
shouldn't be presenting the green line at all, because that's going to be a controversial view for people, right? So,
Yeah, I'm not
I
gonna
mean, it's
deny
like
that.
the green line isn't going to be palatable to anyone. We really ought to have a whatever is between green and purple.
But the green
I
is what the town
disagree.
legally has.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
We need to show.
It's actually the exact opposite, like, it's almost like, we have an easement, that we should be, rather than talking about incurring all these additional costs and getting leases from Metro North and all the other wetlands issues, we have an easement. So the question really should be, terrific, let's use our easement for the benefit of the community, but how can we then protect the privacy and the concerns of the Chestnut Oaks folks?
Place of the old wall?
That to me seems like the only issue, other than we're just basically not looking at the best interest of the whole community.
So the
Why
town.
Like,
would-
would
why
we
wouldn't
do
you just move the
screening on the
green o- I
Chestnut
don't-
Oak
I don't
side of the
understand that
easement, or something we could do to kind of make it palatable to both parties, to not incur Metro North fees and time and everything else, but how to make it more palatable utilizing the existing easement? Like, would we put a fence on the other side of it so that it's kind of blocking the trail, or would we do some kind of greenery screening, like what,
Absolutely.
you know?
Yes, so that's all part of this, you know, discussion through the early stretch here. The offset between the property line and the center line of the bike easement is about 10 feet. So there's not a whole lot of room there, but as we get into this middle stretch, and there's a lot of mature vegetation in this center stretch, all along here actually. So, you know, looking at potentially in this area, moving it behind the fence, or having it weave through that park area so it's not right along the road. I think it could make it a nicer, aesthetically pleasing, you know,
Absolutely.
experience for trail users, and then also get it away from the property owners in Chestnut Oak. But really, what we wanted to present and show on the map at this point is the existing easement that the town owns. And then, you know, really the alternative is Chestnut Oaks property or Metro North property through this area, and that's what this is
And I'm
intended
sorry,
to
just,
do.
because I'm just a little hard time visualizing. Everything on the other side in this picture above the purple, which I guess is west, is Metro North property or no?
Can you see this black line?
Yes.
That's Metro North.
Okay,
property
so
line.
on the other side of that purple, but before that black line, right, yeah, for example, there,
Yes.
we wouldn't need Metro North's permission. We have enough
No,
space there?
exactly.
So you're really just talking about
The entrance.
towards the top at the
This
end?
area and then this area.
Back there.
Right, but then what, because ultimately you're popping out of Chestnut Oaks at the bottom there. But
Yes.
before then, isn't that, am I mistaken?
The area that has the least amount of wiggle room is the southernmost portion of
Yes.
North Greeley.
I mean, right now it's a
Northernmost
curb
portion-
line, then the hedge,
There's
the hedge
property to
here,
work
and then
because
the
of-
fence.
Yeah, because of the cul-de-sac, because of where the parking setbacks are, there's always room to move with walls. I've said from the beginning, the biggest challenge is gonna be after the curve where the entire development kind of moves west,
Yeah.
is where that is the least amount of wiggle room over there.
Where does Chestnut Oaks end? Can you just put it right
there.
The property line actually extends all the way down to Bischoff Ave.
Right.
Where our public
Oh,
sidewalk.
right.
Yeah, so our
So
public
these-
sidewalk
this
ends where
property-
Chestnut Oaks begins.
This property must have an
Yes,
access
see
agreement
that
with
uses-
the
Yes,
Chestnut
it's
Oaks
on it.
HOA
That's the
in
end of
order.
the store, yes.
Yes.
Right.
And just to point out, this area where we come off of Metro North back onto Chestnut Oaks with the purple line, you know, that would require a new easement with Chestnut Oaks.
Exactly.
So we're either, you know, the purple line, while we would follow it in this stretch, before the housing, the residential units start, we would then either be on Metro North or be acquiring or looking at a new easement on Chestnut Oaks property.
Can you, and I'm sorry, you may have a better view of this, but I see the town, there's the townhouse and they're all right next to each other, sort of in the,
In the center?
In the center.
Where the little kind of bulge comes down?
yes. And I'm thinking now south of that, those structures, those structures, what are
Yeah.
those are what?
Those are homes.
Those are also the townhouses?
Yeah.
They are, okay,
Just the very
There's
furthest
different
north,
shaped buildings.
right there, that's the ambulance corps we just had, that's the
okay,
ambulance corps.
okay.
And the community garden next to it.
Okay. Wasn't clear to me. All right,
Why don't we go to the next?
thank you.
So then,
Sorry.
we move along to what we're kind of referring to as, you know, the wetland portion of this trail, and then also this portion that we're showing two different alternatives. In this area, we initially looked at a route following the sewer trunk line, which you can see depicted here, but that is all within wetlands, and so at this point, we're showing an alternative trail route that would follow the toe of this slope, this hillside, stay out of the wetlands and stay on town property. We would have this is Shadow Brook Parkway, just to orient you. So here we would have a crossing of about a 200-foot or 150-foot crossing of some wetlands, and there's also a stream that goes down through here. So that's what's depicted here. We are showing at this point that would be a feature that we think would add something nice to the trail. An offshoot boardwalk that would kind of loop through the wetlands, offer some education, interpretive opportunities. But that's something that could be, you know, phased in or an additional improvement at some point. So that brings us to.
So make sure I understand, you're talking about a boardwalk. So there's boardwalks and there's boardwalks. So are you talking about that boardwalk?
That kind of boardwalk.
Got it.
Something like this, and there's a lot of varying ways to, you know, we can have concrete surface, wood surface,
Oh, no, it's
railings.
fine, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just railroad ties
wetland.
with, you know, some.
A wetland boardwalk. And the reason that's required is because then those footings, whether they're piles or, it's a much smaller footprint for wetland impacts, where if we're building a trail through there, you have the 10-foot trail and the grading next to it. It incurs, it's in the overall goal to avoid, minimize, and mitigate wetland impacts. So that's one area that we'd be looking at. So then we get up onto this stretch where we're showing two alternatives. The green line is following the existing sewer trunk line. And that's depicted just to the west of it. We are also showing an alternative that would veer off while still on, this is all town property here. These properties below this line are private properties. So we are showing an alternative that would veer off to the west, and then we would have about 1,200 linear foot of boardwalk through wetlands. And the purpose of that would be to avoid these 5 properties. So we've kind of got these two alternatives in this area that have varying permitting.
So you're saying
construction.
that, so this is where the trunk line is on private property?
Correct. So,
exactly.
as the information that we've reviewed appears to indicate, there's a 12-foot wide easement for that sewer, which is for the sewer to begin with, and it's not, it wouldn't be wide enough to permit a trail anyways. During the reconstruction and relining of the trunk line in 2007, 2008, there were some additional temporary easements acquired, but those were extinguished at the end of the project. So this line from here essentially to here would.
How long is that? The alternative?
The alternative in the boardwalk section here is about 1,200 feet.
Does it have to be the raised boardwalk that you, like this really?
In order
The best way to get the permits and to get it approved?
in order to minimize impacts to the wetlands, because if it was constructed like the trail will be elsewhere, it would be over 1/10 of an acre of impacts, which then triggers mitigation requirements through Army Corps and DEC. So then that's an additional project cost if we weren't to look at boardwalks.
It's beautiful.
You have to create as much wetlands you take away, correct? Is that how it works, kind of?
At the very least, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Sometimes it can be a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you impact an acre, you got to create 2 acres. The other item with mitigation, and there might be a potential on town-owned property down here to do that mitigation, but there's ongoing maintenance requirements to make sure that the wetland succeeds, essentially.
Stays wet.
Stays wet, yeah.
I just have a question from, the raised boardwalks, I think they're awesome. And I've been on to one park in Connecticut where it was like spectacular. But my question is, if this is supposed to be, is this now become a 3-season? I mean, how do you clear that off?
So-
If you've got fencing on the side, which does not, while it looks sturdy enough, it's,
Right.
you're gonna have, how does that work?
So there are a lot of boardwalks that are used through the winter. So there's 2 winter uses. You can have it unplowed for cross-country skiing
Right.
and snowshoeing.
Sure.
Or it can be plowed. So obviously, if that was the intent of the town, to keep it cleared during the winter, the surfacing would have to be designed such that it would be able to withstand.
No, I guess my question is 1,200 feet, 10 foot wide, 12,000 feet plus 4 inches, 8 inches high. Where do you put the snow?
It would be going off the sides into the wetlands
So
area.
it's
Yeah.
not going to be, there's not gonna be any screening sort of at the lower level so little kids don't decide to.
So if it's over 30 inches high, it requires a railing. If it's under 30 inches high, it has to have a curb for ADA requirements. But, that's kind of a decision whether you want a railing or not and whether it's required. But even if it does have a railing, the snow can be removed off the sides of the railing.
No, I was just looking at the topography, it's like from high to low, looks like 20 feet. So I didn't know like if you were hovering this like 2 feet above.
Oh, so this, generally, regulatory agencies like to have at least 18 inches below the beam on the boardwalk such that animals, plants, light can get through, water can get through. And when there is some flooding down there, it's not over the boardwalk. So at a minimum, we're probably 18 inches plus another 12 inches above the existing grade, but we're not going to be 3-4 feet
Okay.
above existing grade. So that brings us to the final image here, where we're along the western edge of the high school, and then coming out to Roaring Brook. So again, the green line following the existing sewer trunk line, which crosses over 2 parcels of town-owned property. Now, we understand that should any school-owned property. So these 2 areas of school-owned property, those would require easements, and we understand that would require, some additional processes for the school to follow through with. So we are showing a blue line that would essentially follow the middle of the slope here and then ramp back up once we're onto town property. This avoids wetlands. The only area we've got wetlands over here is it's actually more of an open pond and more visible. But this is a fairly heavily wooded bank, and there would be additional grading requirements and so forth. The trunk line is kind of, imagine an old rail corridor that they convert into a rail trail. The grading's done, the clearing is done, but there are 2 feasible options here. Go back on. Or no, we can go. So then we get into this stretch where the gorge comes down by Roaring Brook. Is this the Roaring Brook?
It's an interesting question. That's an interesting question.
Anyways,
I never thought to ask it.
I just.
No,
So-
actually, we're on the other side of the park.
Oh, okay.
Where does it go from there?
So here, you can see these green dots. This information is from Westchester County. So these are the manholes pictured a couple slides back that we saw the aerial crossing. They're hidden by the rendering here. But we have about 110 foot span for a new pedestrian bridge, essentially. So this is the rendering that we put together for that span. Here's another alternative that is a project we've done elsewhere in the state, again, about 100-foot span. So, this is something, there's a lot of different alternatives to look at, but with, it's a small enough span to get a prefab truss in there and span that gap. So then we move along to Roaring Brook, and we're coming out preliminarily. We're showing a conceptual layout for a northern trailhead. So something where people can come, park, maybe a bike fix-it station, a water fill station, things along those lines, so that then they can go either north or south from that point. This area of Roaring Brook, while it's kind of, depending on the hour, can be a little tricky to maneuver.
You want
There
people
is,
crossing there.
yeah, we walked up along the side of it, and it was
Yeah.
Yeah.
it was an
We're
interesting
still
time.
alive, we got that going for us.
But this portion of the trail on the outside of this bend, you have good visibility up and down. One thing that we've shown here is kind of a shoulder, a turning lane for people coming up Roaring Brook to turn in. And this might even be something that would need to be right in, right out only, but it's something that could footprint on. This is town-owned property, so we wanted to kind of show it in that respect.
Should it be very successful, is there space there and slope properly to expand that footprint for the parking?
So there is a good amount of slope to this
That's what I was
this
gonna ask.
area.
That's a pretty
It's,
climb on a bike.
so what we're showing here is about a 20-car parking lot. And I think what we'd have to look at here is putting in a couple low retaining walls. There would be some opportunity to expand a bit, but we are bounded by the brook on one side, and the trail's a good distance down, but it does have. We'd have to look at some unique design solutions to expand it.
Yeah, because the town property also ends, we're limited by that as well.
And so then we come up along Roaring Brook, along the south side. Initially, we were looking at a, kind of a 5-foot buffer separation from the roadway so that it's a little more comfortable for trail users. But when we did get out there and walk the non-existent shoulder, there is a nice, there's a really wide right-of-way through here. And on that right-of-way, there's a bit of a bench that's separated.
See it in that lower picture.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a bench that's separated vertically and horizontally from the roadway. So that's what we're depicting now on this alternative analysis plan, so that trail users, not only are they away from moving vehicles both horizontally, but they're a little lower then, so trying to increase comfort of the trail user
Yeah,
there.
and a guide rail or something could also be added along that edge.
Are you thinking that it continues to be a trail at the same width as opposed
Yes.
to just changing into a sidewalk there?
Yes, so
Keeping the
full,
10-foot wide two-way.
yep.
How
Is that private
mandatory is
property?
this extension where it
No,
parallels
it's in the right of way.
Roaring Brook Road?
So
What are the pros and cons of doing this?
So what this accomplishes, if we're able to accomplish a parking lot here, that does provide kind of a northern terminus. This orange segment that would go all the way up to South Farm Road, the new intersection, or the improved intersection there, would make that connection to Chappaqua Crossing and Horace Greeley High really easily. So there would be an off-road connection from downtown all the way up to that point. Otherwise, you're kind of getting to this parking lot and then braving it up the hill, or that's the end of. So we feel that having this segment, and this is something that could be phased at a later time, or this could be progressed even, this could be an easily detachable part of the project. But it really makes this into more of a commuter trailway, and something that's able to be used by a lot more people trying to get around town without a vehicle.
Is
That's
there,
really the
was there
goal,
any
I mean.
study on the south end of parking where people are gonna park if use of the trail? I mean, presumably if it's popular, people are gonna need to park on both sides.
Yeah,
So-
I think, oh, good.
There's really, as you're aware, there's really no property there to do that. However,
Well, there
There's
is.
a town
across
parking
from the-
lot, but that's further down and then the post office, but you're not
But I
parking
think the
Crossing
there.
thought
all
is
the way.
it will actually just connect to downtown, while
So
this
once
trail is ending at this spot.
We're really showing the trail terminating here at Bischoff Ave. But then this
And then
becomes,
you hit sidewalks.
And you
then
hit
you have
sidewalks.
sidewalks in order to get downtown.
Right, no, I
So-
get that, but I'm saying,
You'd have to
park,
walk
right
on
now,
So you'd be parking downtown,
or you'd
walking
be
up on the
parking-
sidewalk, or
you'd be
riding your bike
parking
up.
on North Greeley, it's really.
Yes.
If you were to park at the
Or
beginning
the
of the
side
trail.
streets.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it'd just be off the street parking.
Yeah, nothing
at that point.
formal has
Nothing formal.
been included
um,
for the southern end.
Not the
Isn't that
southern
piece
end.
of property that was for sale?
Across from the post office,
Yeah.
that's where I was thinking.
Yeah.
But isn't this more like just two connection points? I mean, isn't it the goal is to get from point A to point B
Yes.
without having to be on Route 117? I mean, it's not like the North County Trailway where people take their bikes, park their car, and then ride 10, 15 miles or something, or jog, a few
This is
miles.
more of the type of trail, at a mile and a half long. This is something that's gonna be primarily, students, town residents that don't wanna, for the mile and a half to get to Chappaqua Crossing to do their grocery shopping, they can now bike up to get there off-road.
Let's be realistic, I think people are biking to grocery shopping, I think.
It'll be used for recreational
I
purposes,
think
absolutely.
it's certainly
will.
accessible.
Well, here's the question, this is the point I was kind of driving at. Either the trail is gonna be used by people other than the people who live along the trail, right? If it's the people who live along the trail who are primarily gonna use it, then those are the folks maybe who should have a little bit more weigh in as to whether I think it's built. If the intention is to build it for the rest of the town, then we have to assume that people are going to drive to either end of the trail and park. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
If the idea is only the people along the trail are gonna use it, that, it's counter to what.
I think the goal is
has
that
been.
So do you
everyone-
mean, when you
Right,
say
so
the
then-
people that are, like, you mean the 400 houses that are like, in Lisa's neighborhood, like Annandale and Taylor, 400 houses over there that would be able to walk to downtown Chappaqua? And then, of course, I guess we should ask the merchants if they think there's a benefit, or any expert who thinks there's a benefit to having 400 more households being able to walk to downtown Chappaqua.
That's possible.
They're the stakeholders too, right? I mean, the goal is to revitalize our downtown, make it more walkable. And since sidewalks on 117 is not really feasible, this is an option that actually accomplishes what most towns across America are trying to do, which is to make it more walkable.
But I think the question that you raised, which is parking at both ends of the trailhead, because I think, I'm not gonna go drive all the way through downtown now, I'm gonna walk down there and then walk back, get my exercise in for the day.
Well, yeah,
And depending on where you are,
Right.
you're gonna wanna park, right?
Maybe, it depends.
I mean,
If you
even
don't
now,
live
North County
along the
Trailway,
trail.
people drive,
Right.
But that's a
But you
whole
might
different
even get,
ballgame.
you'd be, I think a lot of Bell kids would be psyched to be able to walk all the way up to Chappaqua Crossing. I think you would basically, it's a way of making sidewalks all the way from Chappaqua
Right.
Crossing into Chappaqua.
No,
into
I'm
downtown
not
Chappaqua.
denying, I'm not
And
advocating one or the
I
other. I'm
remember living in
saying,
the city and yes, walking with a stroller and going food shopping, and so you might have someone who's downtown and decides they're gonna walk up and go pick up something and have lunch and then come back down, or
Agreed.
vice versa.
but all I'm saying is, what I would say to be prepared for, and that those of us who are on the committee walked along it. It happened to be a particular day where the ambulance corps had one of their meetings, I forget what it was, and it happens once a month where they park along South Greeley, and it is a real challenge to drive through there, and it's only for an hour, and all it takes is one or two cars along South Greeley to create that impediment. So if we think people are gonna drive through, if it's gonna be successful, then that's just something that needs to be thought of, where to direct parking and maybe parking zones or something like that, because it creates an issue just getting in and out of the development, that's all I'm saying.
But I hear
It's
what
another
you're
thing to
saying.
think
Yeah, no, no,
about.
no,
I think if
point.
people are driving to it, to be perfectly honest with you, it's not really serving the purpose. I mean, the purpose that I see is just people that are living, again, in Lisa's neighborhood, can't really walk to downtown Chappaqua. I mean, to downtown Chappaqua. You can't do it unless you're willing to walk on the highway, right? We hear all these people from Whole Foods and Lifetime walking on 117 at night. That's the goal of this thing, is to get people from point A to point B. Now, if parking is a problem, then you could make it no parking, and you could also, people just won't use it. You're just not gonna drive there if you have a trouble
But
getting
it
a parking spot.
cuts the,
or if
it
it's a pain
cuts
in
the
ass.
overall demand if there's not adequate parking.
I don't know, that's
That's really a fair
data that
question.
needs to be studied, but
Yeah, it's a fair
the point
question.
is, if it is as popular as some think it will be, people may want to drive to. People drive
There's
from
gonna-
across the
Yeah, it's a
county to
3-mile
the
flight.
aqueduct trail.
No, there's definitely gonna be some people who wanna drive.
Yeah,
I
and
don't
I
know.
think it's something that we should take a look at, the available parking
On the
downtown. The
southern
other
portion.
thing
We can look
is,
at it.
on the weekends and on holidays, we happen to have a empty 1,300 spot
Right.
parking lot downtown, so we've got plenty of parking for people to be able to come, take and drive through town and go up.
Yeah, get a
Well, and
coffee,
with the
they don't have to
recent-
park right at
And
the
the amount
edge.
of
Well, we
people.
know that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get it all
That's
the way.
right. It's a very quick point.
We're gonna walk.
And,
That's the
once,
point, it's
once
a
we
trail.
get down, to Bischoff
We're gonna
Ave
walk,
here, then we're on, town-owned streets, there's sidewalks, there's an opportunity to look at bike lanes, so that you could have a separated bike lane and utilize existing so the pedestrian can be on the sidewalk, bike lanes, could bring you right downtown and, utilize the parking downtown. And, eventually as a next phase of the project potentially, to really formalize the connection from Bischoff all the way down to the train station and to the middle school so that it's, not just you get here, now you're on sidewalks and you're on your own almost, it's not as delineated. But really taking this as a first phase and then, depending on the needs, if there's a demonstrated interest in connecting that, it can be a southern extension. That is a possibility, but it's a good point, and that's something we'll take a look at and how, even through signage, to delineate that and how if you wanna come here, park and use the trail, how do you do that?
And look, I think it's a way, like you have the sidewalks, let's say like up at Dodge Farms or up 120, where people can walk past the duck pond and walk into town, and this is a way to connect this entire side of Chappaqua or Newcastle to the rails and to a hamlet without having to walk on 117.
And get the
So
cross-country
important.
team off the road.
And get the cross-country.
And by the way, you have less parking demand in downtown. Granted, some people could definitely drive to this trail and plop down and then do their thing and then get back in their car. But you're also gonna have people not driving to downtown because we have the trail. They don't need to drive to downtown anymore. They can take the trail, just like you see people walking up 120 on the weekends. Tons of people walking up 120, using the sidewalks. And we all know that sidewalks on 117 would be great, they're just not feasible. It's just not practical, and it's just not happening.
So I would love to just sort of wrap this up by not really wrapping it up, by asking the board and the committee for feedback and direction for Leo and Ryan. So that they
Well, I
know
don't
how to go
understand,
forward.
direction for what? What are they doing next? Like, where are we at in the project, so we can
They've
understand
offered
what
us
kind
a
of
couple of
feedback.
options, but I think.
So we're meant to tell you which of these options we want you to pursue, as opposed to, I thought
Or
you
if you
guys were
see-
pursuing all of the options.
We are, but maybe you see some, real issue or problem that one of these options can't go forward or anything like that, really.
Well,
that
I
would-
see one. I
Costs, we
personally
just
see
need to
one
know.
with the Metro North. I'd be honest with you. I know some people in, Chestnut Oaks may not like to hear this, but it seems that if we have an easement, a town-owned easement, we're not asking to get an easement, we have a town-owned easement. It seems to me that, and by the way, when we got the easement, it was, I assume, bargained for, right? So we might as well use the easement that we own. And to go the Metro North route and to deal with the wetlands and to deal with all the costs and the lease, it just doesn't make sense to me. So personally, I would not waste the time with that option, which will add years to the process and may not even be able to get done, and focus on the easement that we actually own, and focus on making it so that it not only minimizes the impact of Chestnut Oaks. I'd rather spend the money, instead of giving it to Metro North, I'd rather spend the money on not only lessening the impact of Chestnut Oaks, but actually giving Chestnut Oaks some benefit that enhances the value of their property. That's where I'd like to see the money go, not to Metro North. That's my opinion.
So have you guys met with the people in Chestnut Oaks yet?
I'm right here.
Oh, yeah, but I know we have.
This is our
Well,
first time.
Well, so just so, from the beginning, I hear, I kind of put everybody off, because there's been a lot of innuendo and suspicion and theories, but I haven't really had anything concrete yet about what the plan is. And I would argue we still don't really have a plan yet. We have an idea of what we want to do. With regards to what you have to say respectfully, the easement doesn't actually work on the trail either. So the way the easement is exactly constructed, you could bulldoze right down the middle of our development. You're entitled to do that. That is something you could do. I would argue there are 88 families and households in Chestnut Oaks that matter to the hamlet of Chappaqua as well, who live along here, so their opinion matters. But in order to deviate from that easement, it's gonna cost something as well. So I think there's a give and take. I think you don't want to give the money to Metro North, and I understand why. And I believe that, there's maybe some sort of equitable arrangement on the northern end. On the southern end, the challenge you're gonna have on either side, if the easement falls along the sidewalk, 10 feet on either side, then that means 10 feet of the bike trail, we don't have enough road then.
No, it would be from the curb 10 feet in. The road would not change at all. For this
Right, but
whole
the
portion.
easement, the center
easement
line,
does
the
center
center
line
line of the curb.
But there would be enough space off of the
10 feet
existing
wide.
road to construct the trail.
So you would need to, so you would then, move the wall 10 feet forward to just basically the curb line?
So that's the question I have for you,
Oh,
so,
because a lot of
from your,
confused
from,
answers.
let me
So
just,
the
let me,
concern
let
would be, what
You
would be
want
a
the trail
challenge?
behind
She
the
didn't
wall.
answer the question.
So the
That's
challenge
my
is.
question.
Yeah, so
Or
to
a
be
fence.
perfectly frank,
Right.
what we would do not want to do, we don't keep people out of our development. What we do not want to do is to codify and encourage a constant walking through the development. We already have issues we discussed this with, people not cleaning up after their dog already. And we're not advertising people come through. We, at least once a summer, have to kick kids who don't live in our development out of our pool, who sneak in to use our pool. The more people we drive in front of our pool, because that's the way the cutout, the easement goes basically right in front of our pool.
Right along the tennis court.
So if the idea is to open up the mouth of the trail at the end of the cul-de-sac and then have at it, it's fine, but then it raises all kinds of other questions. Slip and fall. Who's liable? Is it, if it happens on the easement, if it doesn't happen on the easement, who's liable for maintaining the easement? That area. Are we cleaning up the trash that's dumped on our road every day that people walk by? I mean, that's kind of, when we talked about trash being along the trail a security concern. And granted, I moved from Mount Vernon to Chappaqua to be safer. So security is relative to everybody's perception. But if you're not cleaning up trash on one side of the trail and it's a security concern, it conceivably can be one on ours. But if we're cleaning up our portion of the trail, how is that handled? So there's a number of questions if it stays on our side of the wall. If it's on the other side of the wall, then that really becomes your all issue to deal with. And
There needs to be a wall.
Yeah.
There needs to be a wall, there's no question about that.
So-
And like I said,
but-
I'd rather spend the money on a nice, and I don't want to sound like our genius in the White House, like a nice beautiful wall.
Right.
And make Chestnut supposed to pay for it?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Metro North pays for it.
But I stop myself, but the truth is, I'd rather spend the money on a wall than
But do you,
give it to Metro
do you
North.
want, I get what you're saying, but let's just say we did that and we took a wall and we put it at the very edge of the road.
Let's call it a fence. A screening fence.
Well, no,
Let's
because
call
I
it-
think
Wait, let me,
It's
let's,
a screening fence
wait,
is
let
what
me
it's gonna
finish.
be, just like it's
So
there
let's
now.
say we put a very nice
The
fence
vernacular
right
side.
at the edge of the roadway.
Right at the curb.
Do you, at the curb,
Yep.
is that what you wanna look at? That close? Because we could, if you kept it on the current easement now, you could take, let's say, the $250,000, I'm making up a number, that we were gonna have to pay to Metro North and really beautify that and make it something that you actually would wanna look at. With the trail
We
on
don't
that
have
side
money
with
set
beautiful.
aside to pay
I'm,
Metro
I'm
North, so it's
making this
not,
up,
you know.
with beautiful plantings, things like that. If rather than pay it to Metro North, I'd rather beautify it for you.
So I have a unique perspective, right? So I'm not defaultly opposed to it. I'm not for it. I'm just trying to learn what it is, right? The final plan is. So to answer your question, if it stays behind the wall and the wall is not intrusive, now the wall isn't gorgeous to begin with. So whatever we replace it with is going to be an improvement. I will admit to that. But if you keep it on the other side of the wall, it's easier for me to then sell it, right? Because to your point, there is an easement, so there's only so much fight that makes sense. So it always made more sense to me to, rather than fight the process, be part of the process. So if that's the best that can be, then that's the best that can be if the trail's gonna get built. I'd rather be behind the wall for a variety of reasons. Now, where the access point for that wall is, or how to get to that side of the trail, is once again, something that needs to be decided. But the hardest part, if you could move the wall on that the southern part of North Greeley, where it starts at the ambulance corps, all the way out to Bischoff, the wall can extend out there and the trail go behind there. I don't see how staunch the opposition could be to that, because any complaint that there would be be one, what's behind the wall? What are you complaining about?
Well, no, what it would mean is the wall, right now you
The
have.
wall would be up against the curb, so you'd be
Or
basically
no,
have a wall on the curb.
or maybe not quite up against the curb, if they
But
split
there's
it
a
down the
sidewalk
middle,
across
but
the
yeah,
street.
right.
So right now, it actually would serve our purpose almost to a certain degree, because one of the challenges we have internally is people dropping off their kids and picking them up at the bus, and people parking on that side of the road. It actually wouldn't be as comfortable to park on that side of the road with the wall right up against it. So.
And may I ask you one more question? Your wall there looks like it's about 16 feet?
Yeah,
I'd say it's in that range.
we cut it down.
Cut it down, because I didn't know how much of it was a noise barrier, how much of it is a visual barrier. I wasn't really sure what the
It's
wall's
both.
initial purpose was.
The purpose is a noise barrier, that's what it's called, the sound barrier, but it's,
So it needs to be a sound barrier, I guess.
A smaller meeting
Yep.
with the committee to be able to work out some of the finer points.
Okay.
What I think what we need to do, exactly, I think the goal is, and by the way, you're right, we have the easement, but I don't mean to say that first of all, I'm not even gonna be on the town board, but nobody's jamming anything down anybody's throat.
I didn't think you were,
I know, the point is though that it's like, the goal is to make it a win-win, right? The goal is to figure out a way so that everybody thinks it's a benefit for them, because it could be a benefit if it's done the right way. So you gotta figure out what's the right way, so then, like Jill said, get everybody at the table and figure out, and nobody's deciding anything because we don't know the costs, but at least you're gonna hear everybody's interests and try to make it so that people actually feel like, yes, this is actually an improvement than what we have now. That's the goal, is to make it a win-win. And it's not a win-win if you're jamming something down somebody's throat.
Agreed.
And we could also, I'm sorry, look at variations. It doesn't have to be that the screening fence goes all the way from north to south. Maybe at the tight spot, it is the curb and the trail is right there, so Chestnut Oaks does see it, but not necessarily for the whole entire length.
No, but I
Again,
think what they
there's so
don't
many-
want is they don't want the public coming on to
I do
Chestnut
understand that,
Oaks
but
property.
again, like in terms of
But what
if
she's
we
saying,
are
not
forced
maybe
to go
just a
on Metro
fence,
North, and if we
something
can
like
avoid staying off Metro North to benefit the town and the cost, maybe there is a portion that it is right on the curb, but then we'll get a screening fence up as soon as we have that room. That I don't think it has to
Some really
be.
thick bushes.
And again, I don't know if we can please everybody 100%, so it might be this compromise. And that's all I'm saying, it doesn't have to be the screening fence the whole
And
entire
at
length.
what point do you guys feel that there would be I mean, like right now, we have the Chestnut Oaks issues to work out, which sound like there's some creative solutions that can be used to address that. Then you have the area where there's the 1,250
Yep.
linear
More.
feet of boardwalk. So let's say the Chestnut Oaks, because you don't have to build 1,200 feet of retaining wall and whatever else, that's a lot of money, and 2,000 feet of fence, so we still may need to do the 2,000 feet of fence. Then you've got the 1,250 linear feet of boardwalk, and then you've got,
Private houses.
this
That's
is
the boardwalk
avoiding the
section.
private houses, because I kind of get the sense they're steering us that way.
We're not steering you anyway.
But, and then you have the trestle, the prefabricated trestle. And let's just leave the trailhead on Roaring Brook Road to phase two. Though it would make sense to basically put that in now because it'll be cheaper. But at least, you know kind of what you have there. At what point does an estimate come into play? Is that part of phase two?
Yep, it's part of our feasibility study. There'll be costs associated with everything that we have talked about.
I guess I don't understand why we're starting to limit the scope. I mean, I understand from the perspective of, maybe we want to avoid going down the path with Metro North, but with regard to whether we're doing a raised boardwalk or we're trying to negotiate with individual property owners, my understanding was it was your scope to look at both of those alternatives and to
Yep, that's
cost
what we're
them
doing.
both. And to cost them both, so I guess I'm sort of like, why are we giving you feedback if that would potentially reduce your scope? I think we want to pursue all potential avenues there.
What this is already kind of, we've been out there, we've looked at the constraints, and there's some of these alternatives that are gonna follow through right to phase two, through final design. So that's a perfect example, right here, following the trunk line or that boardwalk. So there's costs associated with those easements on private property, and then there's added cost to the boardwalk. So those are going to be, what our feasibility study will do is, there'll be a single identified route, okay? And then we'll have areas such as this, and if we maintain the one to avoid school property as well. So the added cost or the cost difference of avoiding these private properties and school properties will be presented in that report to say, to avoid that, we're gonna deduct the private property easement acquisition, but we're gonna add in 1,200 foot of boardwalk and so on. So this is not, we're not going to, at the end of this, just give you one final preferred route, but we would like to narrow it down such that the town has valuable, hard information and costs to then go forward and say, you know, this is the cost difference for these two alternatives, and this is what's palatable to move forward.
I think you have to build out this alternative, meaning the southern end by Chestnut Oaks, of the multiple alternatives there, to give us a better assessment before we can narrow what you're going to do. Because there's only so much we can do on the other end, but it seems like here there could be multiple different options. And, you know, if it turns out to be, again, making up numbers here, if it's millions of dollars more and it's gonna take us 2 years to do it, then certainly that may not be an option. But before I make that assessment, I need to know. And, you know, just looking at this picture, for example, this graph, this diagram, pardon me, you know, how far can this current easement in the southern portion go further west before you can't go further west anymore? Because is it 10 feet? I can't tell. Between.
Towards Metro North?
Towards Metro North.
So,
yellow.
in
Before we hit
this section,
there-
the western edge of the easement hugs the property line essentially.
So-
So, right now, you got the curb, 10 foot to the property line, that is the easement, and it's also the property line. So, in that area, and just one question that I wanted to get in is, who does winter maintenance on this portion of North Greeley? I'm just thinking for snow maintenance in terms of having a fence right on the curb line, and, you know, whether that's Chestnut
Right.
Oaks or,
So that's actually a bit of contention.
okay, then let's not go
For
there.
years it was the town, now all of a sudden it's us, but
Okay.
that's neither here nor there.
And I don't wanna
Figuring
start
that out.
another,
a nice
aside,
segue.
but, you know, so, you know, this area really, essentially, the option is Metro North or right on
Give us
the.
then my personal suggestion is give us numbers, let me know what I'm talking about here. Because
Right.
if something is simply not plausible, actually, then we have to make that determination, but you gotta give me the numbers and time.
And that's
Absolutely.
what will be summarized in our, you know, our final report, so.
But wait a minute, I kind of feel like so can you just walk me through, or maybe Jill, you can walk me through what the next phases are?
So the last,
See, these are concepts.
yeah, so the last slide, second to last slide,
Schedule,
schedule.
here we go.
There we go.
Yep, we got
We are
conceptual
here.
design plans.
We're here. So before they got to the end, I thought it was important that they come and just let you guys know.
Why, but I don't think a final design approval can happen before cost estimates. I mean, it's almost like when you do a
Final design
Approval,
approvals
exactly, but
of
how
the
can we-
alternates to go out to.
To get cost
Yeah,
estimates.
so-
We're gonna have, we will be taking, some areas like this area, we've already determined it doesn't make sense cost-wise and wetland impact-wise to follow the trunk sewer line, and we're on town properties, so we're gonna follow the toe slope. There are certain areas where we're able to definitively define where it's going to go. There is a chance that, I mean, that might happen in other areas too, as these conversations continue on. But what we will have is an actual layout of this trail, and in some places it might still go 2 different routes in our final feasibility study. That will be laid out and designed 2 different ways if certain areas are not.
I understand, but
Chosen.
in like, I'm just, again,
Well, all the costs will be in that feasibility study, and then the next phase of phase 2, which is not part of this current project, is when, you know, that's when that final route of which one you're gonna go with and move forward into final design.
I understand, but see, normally when you build something, you have a budget, right? You kind of build a budget. But in this particular case, you know, we're turning to you for a budget.
What's a
And,
feasibility
and you're asking us to do a final design approval.
She's saying there'll be alternatives, it's not a
There's
final.
gonna be alternatives.
Right. I
She's saying
think
there's gonna be
design
what I'm
alternatives.
saying is it should be design alternatives with, you know, and I get it. There's no engineering work done, it's not gonna be perfect, but there is an ability based on something to come up with preliminary estimates.
Absolutely, so.
And is that gonna be part of?
Absolutely, so part of this, you're going to see, a cost for, let's say the, alternative one is to follow the bike easement and follow the trunk line, and that is X dollars. And then if we have alternative two to, avoid, go behind the fence at Chestnut Oaks and go through the wetlands along those private properties, those will also be estimated as a cost.
So my concern's a little different. When are you engaging with these 5 private property owners? Because my understanding, I don't know if other people agree with me on this, but my feeling is we're not going through eminent domain to take their property in order to build this trail. So there's a real choice point there about whether or not we're moving forward with this project.
Well, no, we have
based
the
on
option for
whether
the
or not.
town property, she already said.
No, that's what I'm saying,
Right,
but
but
to the extent that there are
don't
two
think they're
conceptual final designs that we're talking about costing, what's the point of costing something if those 5 property owners are a no-go on it? I mean,
We can go
I
around
feel
them.
like, I
We can go around
understand
them with
that,
the
but
board
we can only go, there's 2 options, right?
One going through, one not.
One
Well,
goes
you can
through and
also
one does
negotiate
not.
with them, depending on
Well,
how
this
much
is my point, when
money
are we
we're
going to
offering
have that
for that
conversation
land.
with them?
Well, actually, what I wanted to
I
ask
hope
was
it's
just.
gonna I would like to get an answer to my question first, and I hope it happens before the public presentation, because I hope that the town
Yes,
has a plan
it
to
is.
engage with the private property owners, not just for the first time when there's a public presentation. So when is that? Cause we're almost in November.
That has
That
not
would
been
be,
said
that,
yet.
Which circle here is when we talk to those 5 people?
yes, so I'm sorry, we have one of the private property owners here.
Okay.
They are part of our committee, however, I did not
Well, he's a
want-
part of our committee,
Well,
but not all 5 of
I
them.
understand, there's another 4, I get it. However,
They don't wanna
he's-
hang when I
He's
go
the only
back.
one who volunteered to be part of the committee,
You and Peter,
so
you guys are real
he gets
popular with
first
your
dibs.
neighbors these days.
What I didn't want to happen is for me to talk to private property owners, have them talk to the town board, and have the town board say, I don't know anything about the project, I haven't been presented with it. So
It's a
I
chicken
thought
or
the
an egg
first step
scenario.
should be
So,
to- no, no,
I get it,
presented
but so
to the
when,
board.
Let
which,
me,
shortly.
so short, which circle is, are they the
Continue
circle
to
right
use
here,
focus
continue?
groups. They're one of our
So
focus
those focus
groups.
groups are
Yes.
the 5 property owners and Chestnut
And
Oaks?
Chestnut Oaks,
Chestnut
the
Oaks.
school.
The school.
Yeah.
let me
So-
ask.
But it could be, this could be cart before the horse. If this comes back and it's $20 million, you may all go forget it,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right?
Of course.
So you don't necessarily wanna, stir up the bee's nest if you don't have to. You're gonna go talk to the 5 property owners, they're all gonna tell you, we don't want it.
Well,
So,
I just-
now,
I-
it doesn't mean you can't get it done. It's an uphill battle, and they don't want it. It's an uphill battle. It can be done. Of course, it can be done. It's just, it's a lot of negotiating. It's a lot of political work and money, and it'll have to be figured out. But if the project is too expensive for the town to build and it doesn't make sense, then I wouldn't
Why the headache?
venture down that path.
That's my question. Well,
pun
but the
intended.
flip side is that we
grants,
continue to
we
have
look
these
at things, too.
conversations without involving them, and I think that that's a risk, and I think it's unfair to them as.
I don't know.
Or
if
just
all
just
5 were
eliminate that
against it.
option and say
Let me
we're
ask you a
not
quick
using
question.
going through private
Let
property.
me ask this question.
Period.
As far as this, we're talking about all 5 or not all 5. I know you have the boardwalk on town property.
Exactly.
Is there a hybrid in that scenario? In other words,
They'll fight it in their will.
it doesn't touch everybody's property the same way.
And they would definitely have.
So there's gonna be definitely some property owners who are okay with it, because they don't even, they will never see the trail.
Right.
And
Wasn't
by
it
the
your
way.
property that's the one right against
Yeah,
it?
Right.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah,
the
no,
most
I-
impacted.
No, I understand, but
by-
some of them are not impacted
Exactly.
at all. So
Yeah,
I think
their
it's a big
house
mistake to
like
assume it's all 5.
Giardina's
So my question is there a scenario where it's a hybrid? You stay off 2 of the people's properties, but you're on 3 of the people's properties
Right.
with their consent, no eminent domain, nothing like that.
Absolutely.
And
Actually,
it's-
with Mr. Morel, he's the easiest one to go around.
But I'm saying, I didn't see a hybrid in this thing. I
So yes,
saw
it's
either
it's a
or.
possibility. So why we're showing it here to go all the way around is, once you get up here, there's about a 15-foot drop or more between the wetland elevation and the trunk line elevation. So when we're down here at this first private property owner, there's a significant, actually all 4 of these, there's a significant horizontal area separation to the trunk line and vertical separation. Mr. Mortel's property, it's the closest to, you can actually see the footprint of the house here. So there is an alternative to, avoid Mr. Mortel's property or the other 4 or vice, whatever it turns out to be. And that design will, because of that grade separation, will have to take that into account. But it is a possibility. You know, we wanted to show that we can avoid all of them, if that is the desired solution that the town would like to move forward with.
And then once these conversations are starting with the 5 property owners, then we'll look at if we are zigzagging in and out of, you know.
Well, and I just have one
properties, so.
other question for you. I guess it would go to the school board and to the private, anybody, property owner that's kind of close within the trail. And I've actually walked the trail, so I know exactly what it's like. But there are times where getting off, I'm gonna call it the trunk line, and getting into somebody's backyard is not that hard, right? They're already cut through paths that have already been established. In other places, it's impossible unless you want to bushwhack. And Bell School, it's relatively easy, there's already something there, and there's other places. Have we talked, in the focus groups that you have with Bell School and with,
Horace Greeley.
I mean Horace Greeley and with the private property owners, are you going to be talking to them about whether there should be fencing separating the
Yes.
trail
Yep,
between?
we have all, yes.
Fencing,
we have.
landscaping, all of those things, because, I mean, frankly, on one of the slides towards the end that we didn't touch on, this asphalt trail following the trunk line versus a boardwalk, we're talking per linear foot about 5 to 10 times more expensive to build a boardwalk than to build the trail up on the trunk line. So what that means is if it happens on the trunk line,
That's fine.
there is additional costs that could be included in the budget for fencing, for landscaping, that would still be less expensive than constructing the boardwalk.
It's the same thing with going on Metro North property.
Yes.
The bottom line is you have some property owners that don't mind the trail because they don't even see it, and yet you're gonna improve their property with screenage and fencing and basically allow their kids to safely walk to Chapel Crossing and to downtown Chappaqua. They may very much welcome it
Fairly full.
and would rather see us spend the money improving their property than building a boardwalk.
But that's why we have to go in and have that conversation.
Absolutely.
Again, but I still said
We
you
have to know
were.
it's
Are
feasible.
we
I didn't know
going to
if
be
it was
having,
feasible.
before you move on to the final design phase, are you going to be coming back to the town board and present the results of the focus groups with these stakeholders?
Yes, yes.
So with this information, we're gonna go and really focus with the focus group. To then ultimately put cost to that, have a draft final report that's gonna be presented. We will present that and have those discussions and modify that as necessary. And then once this phase is complete, where you'll have that kind of alternative analysis with those costs, with the, you know, private property versus not, et cetera, all those factors considered, then, you know, that's the time that additional conversations with those private property owners, with Chestnut Oaks, can occur to really determine how the town wants to move forward with the project.
So say that again, just distill that down to me again. I'm sorry, I just was,
So-
I got caught up in something you were saying and I started thinking
So
about it.
ultimately, at the end of this project, this phase of the project, there'll be a report that summarizes all these alternatives, our findings, the permitting requirements, the costs, all of these different factors. But we know there are some things we cannot determine tonight or during this phase of the project. We're gonna present a cost and say, to go around these private properties is X dollars, and then that's a decision really that has to come, you know, from the town to determine whether
I think, for
How to
example,
proceed.
Chestnut Oaks,
Well, that's the baseline start, right? So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, the most expensive path is to avoid all private property possible.
course.
Right?
Of course.
So what's that dollar amount? Anything less than that dollar amount, you're ahead of the game, but that's where you start, that's
Yeah.
the starting
Absolutely.
point. I think for everyone, if that dollar amount's $20 million,
Yeah.
then we know where our starting point is. Maybe it's acceptable, maybe it's not, I don't know. But that's really, start with the most expensive, and then you can start
20 million?
whittling away at that point.
Right.
If you start at the cheapest, then you're gonna start adding expenses, and you don't know where it ends.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
To my point, what I was just trying to say a moment ago, Chestnut Oaks, in terms of the number of people that it impacts or affects, is larger than anyone else. And certainly their voice is relevant, and we're doing our best to circumvent. And whether we ultimately do this and it's feasible economically, financially, and it's through that property, Chestnut Oaks has to be part of that conversation. And don't misconstrue what I'm saying, that I'm supporting to do that. But to your point, and I think to Lisa's point before, and then Nick sort of responded to it. If we're part of my, I'm saying it properly, but making up Lisa's number before of $250,000, whether it is or isn't the number, there could be a benefit to Chestnut Oaks where the residents do ultimately say, you know what, those dollars could be used for certain infrastructure and however it can be used.
I get it.
And therefore, you know, we'll be willing to accept this, what somebody says is inconvenience, somebody says is a great gift.
Right.
But they need to be part of the conversations. We need to see what that breaking point or that point is that it's gonna work for everybody,
And there's also
if we
gonna
go
be-
that route.
There's also gonna be some, besides the spending the
And-
money
and you-
wisely to the benefit of Chestnut Oaks, there's also gonna be some residents who actually are going to, you guys already could walk to downtown Chapel, so that's great. But there's gonna be some residents who actually appreciate the fact that they'll be able to walk to Chapel Crossing. You know, so there's gonna be some residents who actually support it. I
Two
know that-
separate
I
issues.
know
No,
that-
no, but two separate
I
issues.
understand that, but they are two separate issues.
Right.
You're saying
But I'm
it's that
just saying,
balance.
you can't also
So not
listen,
everyone
you can't
might
also
be
listen to the
against it.
vocal,
Right.
the most vocal, because it's usually the people who are against it who speak the loudest, which is fine. I was part of that group at one point. But the point is, you gotta listen to everybody.
Correct.
All the stakeholders.
Correct.
Not just the most vocal.
Correct, but we're all theoretically or technically stakeholders, but those who it directly impacts, whether it benefits them or adversely, because it's on their property, we need to engage them more. It's not whether or not, even if there's a greater good for lack of a better term.
Absolutely, and also something else to consider, with Chapel Crossing, there were plenty of people who were in favor of Chapel Crossing, but out of respect for their neighbors, they didn't speak up. And it's the same thing with this, with Lawrence Farms North. There's gonna be plenty of people who see a tremendous benefit in their kids being able to walk to school with this trail, and walk to downtown Chapel, and walk to Chapel Crossing. But out of respect for those 5 property owners, they're not gonna speak up. Now, Chestnut Oaks may not have the same issues, but that's something you gotta consider too. It's the reality of the situation. I have people talking to me all the time, but they're not gonna say anything publicly, because they don't wanna offend their neighbors, and it's totally understandable.
True. And also, when you meet with the Chestnut Oaks stakeholders, I'd be interested to see, you know, keeping in mind the very legitimate concern that they don't want people walking past their pool and tennis courts, if there's even a kind of hybrid scenario where maybe further south, as we're approaching the ambulance down there, it's like, can be a beautiful path on this side of the fence, and then at some point, it may go behind or be better screened so that so that people are kind of blocked from more delicate areas of the neighborhood. So maybe there's a hybrid where it's not
For the-
all one or the other, it can be a little bit of both.
Yeah, for this presentation, obviously, in the idea of keeping it
Right.
shorter, we were giving you the
Right.
conceptual route and some of the things we've been looking at. When we start meeting with the focus groups, it's gonna be absolutely more detailed. It's gonna be showing them how it can look, maybe some additional renderings. It's gonna absolutely be, so they can understand more than 2 lines on a piece of paper, 100%. But again, this was not the setting for that.
Right.
So,
So you will get the feedback consolidated, whether it's a presentation or a memo, one way or the other, but we can get that feedback for any final design.
right. Yep.
And it's a final alternative design.
I
Exactly.
understand, but I kind of feel like you guys still have more work to do.
Oh, yes,
No, 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 no.
we do.
We do, and that's why they did it, because I didn't want them getting ahead until they had an opportunity to present it to you guys collectively, because I needed this feedback.
Is the trestle a major part of the cost?
It is not, no. Project we had recently out to bid with some site improvements and 100-foot span truss all included, so it was a little kind of pocket park with a bridge. The bids, I think, were less than $750,000 for that. So it's, relatively speaking, it's not gonna be half of the cost of the trail or anything like that. It's a relatively small proportion of the overall trail cost.
And I forget, are you guys also advising us as to potential grant opportunities for this?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
so actually, what a great segue, thank you. So there is a proposal in the.
Well, that was in the packet.
I hope our trestle would not
I have
cost
to say,
that kind of money.
it wouldn't take as long to go through this if we got the materials in advance of the meeting. We could read them before we got here. I mean, it's
You said
frustrating to walk
$750,
in
but
and
that's a
have all
much
this
more-
information that we haven't reviewed.
That's a lot
I'm
for
just like,
a trestle.
I was a little dismayed by these numbers.
the grants were in the packet.
So,
Trails were
so essentially,
This was not.
yeah, I mean, that's essentially what they're running.
Not the
I
one
mean,
that went out on
Trail
Monday.
following the trunk line, figure about $100 you know, a linear foot as a ballpark, you know, as a ballpark number to give you that.
$100 a linear foot?
If it was like a
I thought we went to different calls, but she was talking about something else.
yeah, I was
Go ahead, sorry. Yeah.
answering Jeremy and,
All the way off one.
but yeah, so it's a substantial cost, don't get me wrong, I don't wanna demean that, but as a, looking at, you know, 1,200 linear foot of boardwalk, it's a smaller cost than that.
So, the proposal in the packet, is, $1,000 for, Barton and Judas to be able to, apply for a grant for us. It's a $40,000 matching grant. So total of $80,000 for, a planning and design of the trail, which would help defray the cost of some of the next phases of what we, within phase one, portions of what we would be doing.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's a relatively short deadline, it's November 8th.
So sorry, that's outside of their current scope of work. Their current
Exactly.
scope was only to investigate grant opportunities, but not to actually submit the
Right.
application?
Yes.
Oops.
Okay.
So there had been a proposal earlier on for $5,000 when we were looking at some significant funding, but it was further down the road and we weren't quite ready for it yet. We didn't have the feasibility study.
And so this $40,000 would be applied towards the cost of their current contract or a future scope
Right,
of work?
it's planning, design and planning of the,
It's this part.
of, it would be this part, right, Lee? It's planning and design of the trail.
Right, but I think it would actually go towards the phase two of actually getting the final, after this feasibility study, it would go towards the next, the
It wouldn't
continued
cover the
cost of this.
It would not cover the feasibility study?
I don't think they can, I mean, do you know the answer to that? They can put it towards this contract that's already been awarded? I think it has to be towards future work.
Can you confirm that and get
Yeah.
back to Jill and she can get back
Yeah,
to us?
yeah.
We can
Because
it would-
confirm
and I
whether
can talk
what
to
the
you further
look back
about this.
period is.
Right,
Look back
because
period
it's
for
still
each
active.
agency is a little different, so,
Right.
It's
you
still
know,
active.
there's some
True.
that are very strict with no look back on reimbursement of costs, that it needs to be incurred after the award,
We
but
can delay
some-
your payment so that it doesn't have to be like that.
We were probably gonna do that anyway.
Have you seen Bob Cioli's desk? This is not a problem.
I'll talk with you more about
Yeah,
this.
would you let me know about
Yeah,
that?
I'll
Okay, that'd be
give you a
great,
call
because
tomorrow.
we had talked about some other grant opportunities.
Exactly.
And that were for the construction, and I said, that's way too far down the path.
Exactly. Okay,
All right, thanks. All
Any
right?
other questions?
Do you want us to leave these boards
Yes, if
here?
you could, that'd be fabulous.
Can I steal my easels?
Yes,
Lee, do you have the,
I have the flash drive.
you have the flash drive,
I just
okay?
need this.
Thank
Um,
you.
So I've got these.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Nice work, though.
Thank you. Well, I think it really getting out there, even though there's some areas that are very, very dense, there's some beautiful areas along there. That it can really it could be a huge asset
pockets of
and
really
and
nice, beautiful
nice
areas.
area for the town. And it just, again, weighing, but it's just weighing the opportunities and constraints and trying to get to that best solution.
Make it a
So
win-win.
that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have his also? Do you have
Oh.
any bombs?
I thought we had one.
We did. That's us. You got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was in the packet, though, so it was for.
Friday, not the one that was on Monday.
Well, I should have seen this out.
The ones on Monday would have the more recent information. Yeah.
I think the one that's up Monday was just some updates. I don't know.
I didn't open it Friday.
Yeah, my concern with that is to have a preliminary sit down with just us to kind of figure out a way to present it, because what you don't want is to present a white sheet of paper to 30 people, because then they'll make up whatever they want. It's going to be awful, and then it goes off the rails, right? So the idea is, I don't know exactly what 100% we're talking about yet, and my biggest concern remains, and it continues to remain, the parking situation. The trail, where it goes, With the exception of the northern end,
I mean, we could put no parking signs in there too.
well, it gets problematic because there's a portion where I suspect people are going to park, which is our property.
Yeah, you
No,
need to
I don't.
anticipate, no, you need to anticipate.
We can put no parking signs in there.
Thank you
Well,
all,
no,
have a great
well,
night.
they don't-
Other
They're
than
gonna lose their
residents
parking
or
spots,
something.
really, if you put no parking along there.
Right,
But,
right.
which is where I fear,
But it could say no parking other than Chestnut Oaks residents, and we give you guys, you know, you get little.
what happens, what my fear is when they
Oh,
park
yeah, that's
on a Tuesday,
Chapter.
what's the first Tuesday of the month,
Chapter.
meeting?
Last Monday.
Last Monday, so people will see cars parked there, they don't know what's going on.
We're gonna do what people are gonna do. I mean,
Everything's
you know,
long-term parking, like look at why any parking.
We
lot.
can do that other than permit parking, you bring them a permit on
Something.
Tuesday night, you know, we can work
Agreed,
that
that,
out.
that needs to be addressed, because that's my only concern, 'cause I think that's one of the things nobody's thinking about, that I think will be the thing that people complain the most about. People are more worried about people walking through development. If you can keep the bulk of the trail to the southern end of development, I personally don't think it'll be that big of an issue with people coming through. And then if it ends up dumping out in some way without the wall, then liability and maintenance becomes a challenge that we obviously need to figure out how that is handled. These are all solvable problems. I'm just saying they need to be solved prior to presenting it to a group of people, because they're all gonna hate your guts.
And they should all, I agree with you, it should be meeting separately.
I agree, talking.
You can talk to get
No, completely, we just have to
feedback
be prepared.
before you presenting them with.
No, I'm saying,
I think the parking is.
what I think the problems are
legitimate
going to be,
concern.
have a solution before you present is my point. The solution may not be acceptable, but it's better than letting them take over the meeting. When I say them, I mean, because our annual meeting's in 2 weeks. This is gonna be a topic of conversation, and it's probably gonna dominate the meeting. And I've struggled to keep a lot of the things that are being said that are completely untrue, November 5th. So that's our annual meeting, and it's gonna be kind of, or November 7th.
We're kind of coming close, you may not have that information.
I agree that it should be two separate, Chestnut Oaks should be met with separately, and the 5 property owners need to be met with separately.
Yeah, I don't think.
No, I was saying, have something to present to both sides.
Yeah.
I just think they need to understand the possibilities and again, to Lisa's point and Nick's point, there is a consensus, whether it's whatever the number is, that it's okay to figure out, as you said, a way to make it happen on the property. It saves the town money, and benefit that Chestnut Oaks.
Listen, you also gotta speak to real estate agents. I mean, I talk to real estate agents all the time. I'm not talking about so much you guys with Chestnut Oaks, but the property owners. I mean, if you just Google
Increases
multi-use
property
recreational trails and property value, you see there's tons of articles how it increases the value. And if somebody's looking for a townhome, you could walk to 2 different business districts. I mean, I'm not a real estate guy, but I think that's a
Well,
pretty
that's
good
why I
selling
bought
point.
this place,
Well, one of
because
the
at the
reasons
time I was
Legends
working city
Commons is
full-time,
so
and I could walk to the train, I didn't have a car.
You can walk to
That's
2
why I
different
bought
business
one.
districts. Your kids can walk to the high school, they can walk to Bell. It's a pretty nice amenity,
All right,
you know?
what's next?
Whenever you're ready, we're gonna open our public hearing on double poles. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming, we will be in touch.
Why do you think no one would do it?
I'm saying no one's, the way the kids would have.
We know.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So, we're now gonna talk about double pole legislation. Annoyingly pushed by Jeremy Salil.
Who's annoying, me or the double poles?
The double poles.
Both.
That's what I meant.
Don't make him angry.
Yes, I turn green.
So, we're having a public hearing?
Yep, so we need a motion to open the public hearing, then if you'd like to.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Would like me to sort of
Please.
provide an overview of a local law.
That'd be terrific.
So this local law, which is similar to ones adopted by other municipalities, regulates the placement of poles within the town's right-of-way. The town owns that property right-of-way, and under New York State franchise laws and public utilities law, utility companies have the ability to locate utility infrastructure within the town's right-of-way. However, it's clear they don't have the ability to use it without being regulated by the municipality. So this law addresses the issue of the double pole, where there's 2 poles on the property. That happens, it's necessary sometimes in the short term because the pole gets damaged. They can't take the old pole out until the crew gets there. But as has been documented and discussed 2 years ago, and it's been the focus of a number of public meetings, there are an inordinate number of double poles in the Newcastle. This local law can only address double poles within the town right-of-way because we can't regulate county or state roads. That's their property, not the town's. The local law in concept provides that when there's a double pole situation, the Commissioner of Highways will give a notice to the municipalities, to the utility companies, depending upon whether it's an emergency or a standard, not a non-emergency. They have a set number of days to then remove the poles. And if they don't do so, each pole that is in violation is itself subject to a penalty. That is $500 for the first violation, $1,000 for the second violation, and every day the violation continues is considered to be a separate violation. And so that's a general
Was
overview.
it up to, or was that the number?
Fine, not exceeding
Not exceeding.
$500 and not exceeding $1,000. So the municipality makes the recommendations as to the fine, then it's up to the discretion of the judge within these guidelines as to what the actual fine would be. So Article Section 11130 sets forth the findings and the purposes. The town board finds that the incomplete transfer of utilities and the failure to remove old utility poles pose safety and aesthetic concerns for the town and its residents. Double utility pole conditions clutter and obscure visibility on sidewalks and roadways, and I believe that the chief and Jerry are going to give us some information on that. There are also unnecessary eyesores on town streets, obstructions for pedestrians and detriments to local aesthetics. There's some others language there as well. Section 111-31 provides us with definitions. 11132 says street opening permit is required. 11133 talks about the removal of dangerous or damaged utility poles, which needs to occur on an expedited basis due to them being dangerous. 11134 is your standard double utility pole condition prohibited, which states that within 30 days of installation of a new pole, notice has to be provided to the other utilities, and the existing pole has to be removed within 90 days. Also, because we recognize, conditions come up, it could be a storm, it could be a number of utility poles. There's a procedure in here in section 111-35 to allow flexibility with those time frames, so long as that is done to the satisfaction of the Commissioner of Public Works. And then he has the authority to modify those time frames, taking into account the information that's presented. And section 111-36 discusses the penalties. And I do recall that notice of, a copy of the local law and notice of tonight's public hearing was provided by the town administrator to the various utility companies.
Actually, by the town clerk.
Thank you.
But I know for certain that we forwarded yet another copy to Con Edison this evening. They asked for additional time to review it with council, but have also asked us for a meeting, which I welcome the town board and even all members to take and attend. I'll let you know when that's going to be. Once again, another meeting with the town board. We get their attention for the first, 6 months after we introduce this legislation, and then we lose them again.
And I think for the benefit of the record, it would be helpful to hear from Jerry and the chief as to their observations and experiences on the roadways within the towns as to double poles, so if we had that set forth on the record.
Just take the microphone, whatever you prefer.
I took a picture of this one today. That's Kiddo and Annandale. It just gives an example of a line of sight problem for vehicles, making a right turn or even a left turn. Most of the time they come from storm damage or a car accident, sometimes from new construction. We have issues with them leaning, partially broken off, cracked, fallen. I think you've seen them enough around town. So they do create public safety issues for us. I took a few more pictures of town roads, and maybe we can go quick.
That's a triple pole, though.
That's a triple, yes it is.
I would imagine it's still covered
That's
under the
different
legislation.
We don't limit it, do we? No.
So that's actually at Woodland, leading to Taylor Road. Again, light of sight, close to the roadway. Forget the eyesore element.
It looks like there's one across the street too.
There is, yeah. And they are, although not talking about them,
Now, that's
all
one
over
where
the state roads.
they've put in higher poles, they've cut off the top, and the other utilities haven't transferred their wires over to the higher
Right.
pole.
And by the way, and there's still a lot of Con Ed poles out there, but the biggest culprit is Verizon. Like that pole right there, that 1.5 pole there, that is not Con Ed.
Con Ed's made their
Con Ed is
improvements.
done, it's Verizon.
And that's why in the legislation, we want to make it jointly and severally liable so that they're all culpable and responsible to take care of
Have
it,
we
so that one
contacted
can't just
Verizon?
push it off to the next.
Yes.
But the point we always make, I mean, myself included, we always make Con Ed to be out to be the bad guy. The reality is, most of these poles are Verizon poles.
And think about the ones that are splintered or roped together or bolted together during storms, what kind of issues they're creating for us as well. And, that comes down on top of the electrical concerns,
Just three as
public
well?
safety. Yes, that's, unfortunately, that's a state road, but I thought it was important, just an example, that's right out Wagon Road.
Right.
And that's, the Children's Aid Society, how many kids and buses are going through there, so I thought that was important too.
It's also, the old pole is closer to the road. Like the new one is further back, which makes it safer, a little bit safer. People that are texting.
Most of the time, the new ones are behind them, the older ones.
Right.
That's Whippoorwill, right at the Whippoorwill Park. And,
Jill, has Verizon or any of the utilities, these are all in my neighborhood, have any of the utilities gotten, other than Con Ed, gotten back to us?
I did hear from April Horton from Verizon to tell me that she had received the legislation and that Verizon really didn't have that many poles in town. I said, that's great, then you won't be too adversely affected by the legislation. And that was the extent of our conversation. She told me that I did not have the proper engines list. I invited her to please provide me with an updated engines list and let me know. She told me she only had 8 poles. I said, that can't possibly be, because I have to tell you that, we've counted at least 100, so that can't be right. And I have not received anything from her.
Well, bad sloppy record keeping should not be an excuse.
there's so many examples in town, I just wanted to pick a few that, were highlighted close to intersections or close to the roadway. And that one, I thought another one, again, State Road, that's Memorial Drive, and we have the nursery school down there, but it's just, the idea how important something happens. Any questions?
Nope. Thank you.
I can't top that
Oh,
presentation.
thanks, Jerry.
No, you can't.
You didn't bring any, no pictures?
Should have made you go first, Jerry.
Exactly, there you go. The biggest problem on
Wait,
the roads,
wait.
okay,
No, I'll
You can bring the mic to you. It's for people at home.
okay. The biggest problem we're facing on the roads is roadside hazards. Poles in general are a roadside hazard, just like street signs are roadside hazards, mailboxes are roadside hazards. The more we can cut down on the roadside hazards on the edge of the road, the safer the roads are. It's better to have one pole in a location than to have 2 or 3, because it's twice as much force needed for a car to destroy itself on a roadside hazard. So our biggest concern is roadside hazards besides sight distance issues that Jim brought up. We noticed on Bar Court in 120, there's a double pole right there. It's the intersection of a town road and a state road. When you want to make a right turn coming off of Bar Court, you can't see past that double pole. You have to pull out onto Quaker Road to see past the pole to make your turn, your right or left turn. So that's a problem all over town. And just to echo about the issue is that I would say more than 90% of the poles are not Con Ed issues. Con Ed has gotten their wires off the poles onto the new poles, and the lower down utilities, Verizon, cable companies, et cetera, they're the ones that are keeping the poles in place. So we're well aware of more than 200 Verizon poles that are out there, more than 200. So I'm surprised they didn't come here tonight.
How do we know, just out of curiosity, they're Verizon as opposed to Optimum or?
Well, you can tell by the cabling. The heavy set cables that are like carry the phone trunk lines, those are not Cablevision or LightPath, those are Verizon cables. You can tell by the poles that are cut off, and you've got those heavy pair of cables that go run right down the road, that's a Verizon cable.
I thought, and I think I was mistaken, at one point I thought that the last one on the pole removes the pole.
Yes,
That's correct,
Yes.
yes.
So when
Well-
Verizon is saying that we only have like 7 poles, maybe they actually do only have 7 of their poles that they installed, and they consider that they own those poles. But if they're the last ones on these other poles, now they own them.
That's correct.
So maybe they're not counting those, obviously.
Right. So traditionally Verizon is the one to remove them. We know from our downtown infrastructure project that sometimes some of the lesser-known cable companies, Crown Castle, Lightpath, First Light, they were the ones that were the last ones on a number of the poles, especially the one South Greeley by Hall of Scoops that took us forever to come down because Verizon had actually was waiting for them to come off the pole before they could take and then remove their service and then get rid of the pole. So we are aware that there are these lesser companies floating around. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Verizon is the one that takes and removes the poles.
So they have to be aware that there's a lot of these half poles that they now own because the ball's in their court to remove them.
Yes, but I think the good thing about the legislation is if it's jointly and severally liable, everyone's in theory and potentially going to be on the hook together. But what's frustrating, and I'm sure for Jill and I'm sure for Jerry, I have asked you both multiple times, and this is by no means an attack at all, multiple times over the past year, can we get an update? And why should Jill and why should Jerry be taking the person power and the time and the dollars, because we are limited as is, to go hunting down poles? It shouldn't be your job to do that. Your employees have much more important things to do, even interns. Who get paid more than us on a daily basis, have much more important things to do than to count poles. And I think what's also frustrating is that even if Con Edison is not to blame for each one, yes, they came and they were responsive and did do a lot of work initially, and then they went stagnant for a long time. And they proclaim to be good neighbors, but I think anyone who's gone through a storm here has realized at times they've been anything but. Not saying it's malicious, but unfortunately that's just the reality. And one has nothing to do with the other in terms of why this legislation is being considered, but we have an issue over a contract dispute that the four corners of the contract makes them responsible for a certain dollar amount for work that was done. And Nick, tell me if I'm saying something improperly here, and I don't believe that I am. Again, one has nothing to do with the other, but in terms of the credibility of you being a good neighbor and wanting to come and be a part of this community, you don't want to take responsibility for your contract and make the town take ownership of dollars. You don't do what you said you were going to do in its entirety. You make us be the last on the line sometimes to deal with outages. Certainly we're not blaming the infrastructure project on them by any stretch, but there are times when we're waiting for them and trying or do our best to work around them, but yet they want to have a meeting with us only because we're considering legislation that's going to hit them in the wallets in the bank account. Enough is enough. We shouldn't have to chase them down, and whether it's their pole or not, in terms of a legal sense, they know the pole's there. They use that pole, then get on Verizon to get it done. And if they can't do it, then we'll do it for them. Meaning, in terms of legislation, not in terms of sending Jerry's guys out to climb poles. Again, it's not beating them up per se, but it is what it is. And I think they have to take responsibility. When you hear of the safety issues alone, forget how it looks, whether it's anti-bucolic or not. There needs to be, an action on our
Well,
end.
and what is more, if they've already moved on to the new pole, it's still a hazard for an upcoming or possible future storm event. So, they may have moved to the new pole. If the old pole is rotted, and that's the reason that they had to move to the new one, in the event of a storm, if that old pole comes down, doesn't matter one bit. They've moved to the new pole, it can still bring down the line. So it does them good from a storm management preparation perspective as well.
And also, I was just going to say, listen, we all want these double poles to be removed. There's safety issues, there's no question about it. We also need to work with Con Ed and Verizon.
Of course.
And these utilities are going to be here a lot longer than we are. And I personally think if we have to keep on, threatening them with this legislation, if that's what gets their attention, then we do that. But I think this legislation should be a last resort. If they're willing to sit with us and we give them a time frame when to get it done, I think we need to work with them, because at the end of the day, we're gonna need to work with them always.
Yeah,
You know?
I agree, listen, I think to a large extent I agree with that. The result is the most important thing, right? I agree, yes, we wanna make sure that it's safe and it's done right. But what I find bothersome is that we certainly have worked with them, right? We've given them 2 years
Well,
to take action.
But then they got lazy. They responded, but then they got lazy.
Right, so to take them 2 years, they go stagnant and do nothing. And then, separate but yet relevant is we're disputing with them and fighting with them over a contract that and their obligations that they just need to adhere to. That's not good, that's not a good neighbor. It's a good neighbor when it hits you in the pocketbook, and that's simply not what we're looking for. We're looking for a mutual, respectful relationship, and we want to work with them, but sometimes you have to get forceful and ugly to make them come to the table.
Absolutely. And
Look,
listen,
I'm happy to work with them, but I don't think that should forestall our adopting legislation either. I think we can do both.
but then you just basically gave up your, you gave up the one thing you're threatening them with. I mean, then you're working with them after you basically just essentially screwed them. Like, we're gonna screw you with this legislation. By the way, other municipalities will soon follow suit, and then you're gonna say, now that we just screwed you, we want you to work with us.
Well, no,
It's not
because
exactly
we
the
can
best bargaining position.
No, it is though, because you're proposing a fine, you're not mandating it. So you can say, hey, as you're continuing, these fines may accrue, as you're continuing to work with us, we will recommend you not be fined, but the minute that this work stops, these fines are gonna commence again.
You're still passing legislation other communities are gonna follow, and that's part of the reason why they don't want it. They're trying to, I mean, I don't want to get into reading their minds, but it just seems to me that it's setting a dangerous precedent for them, and it's in their interest to come here and to address the problem, and it's in our interest to make sure we hold their feet to the fire, but I don't think, in my opinion, we pull the trigger, because then I think we've lost, I think we've taken it to another level that I don't necessarily think is where we want to be for the long term, in my opinion.
For the sake of conversation and argument, Nick, could legislation be passed, and I'm not asserting that this is the answer, that instead of sunsetting, the sun rises on this legislation if in 1 year from now, that the polls are not removed? And just as an example.
Yes, the effective date. So we can determine that the effective date of a law is X days, months from the date of adoption.
Right, and the only reason I say that is we've been talking about this law for like 2 years now. And for this not to be done, I mean, part of what we wanted, Jeremy was asking for a progress report just to make sure that they were actually making progress. But there was progress, some progress made. I actually am impressed by how much progress was made from Con Ed's point of view. But I think if you're gonna be suing Verizon $10,000, $500 a poll, they need, whether it's a year, whether it's 18 months, but some reasonable amount of time, because otherwise, we're just gonna be threatening. It means the thing is toothless. Oh, I'm gonna bring it up again.
Well, but that's sort of the point, that we talked about it, we gave them time to fix it.
Exactly.
And they
have
didn't
it.
use all of their
can't be the
time, they
town
have
board
it,
who
at
cried
some
wolf.
point, you have to adopt the legislation and
I
say,
agree.
enough's enough.
The bigger picture, or part of the picture to me is go back to that theme of being a good neighbor, which is you can't enforce something that's unrelated, meaning we can't make them come here and give us the right amount of crews post-storm. We can't make them, by enacting this legislation, to be responsible to the contracts and to our community and just to the law. But we can let them know that we mean business, that if they don't start really being a good neighbor, there's consequences. And most importantly, is that's not the driving force behind this, that we'll never compromise safety, and they need to get it done. So I'm open to ways to get there, but I think we should at least continue on the path of examining this. And I look forward to having a conversation, a meeting with Verizon, Altice, whomever it may be. Con Ed.
You may wanna reach out to Con Ed and let them know that we're serious.
Well, they know. They called. I was there today on the phone. We spoke with Jane today on the phone.
No, I know Jane knows we're serious. I'm talking
By the way,
about
we have some of the responsibility in the sense that, we knew that they were dropping the ball a little bit. We chose not to push this because we needed their cooperation with our infrastructure project. So I'm not saying the blame is not the right word, but the truth is, if we sit down in a meeting with them and we don't, we don't have things distracting us like a downtown infrastructure project where we desperately need their cooperation, we're in a stronger position to hold their feet to the fire. without necessarily passing legislation, just by basically, they started last time, but then they took their foot off the gas and we let them.
Right, but we shouldn't
Next time, we
have
won't let
been-
them take their foot off the gas.
We shouldn't have to make them, we shouldn't have to be willing to hold back on forcing them to do their job just so that they can work with us, right?
We shouldn't
It should be
compromise the
mutual.
safety of our residents to try to gain position with Con Ed.
Well, that's definitely true, but at the same time, next time there's a power failure, and we're asking for their cooperation, or you have a temple that's out, or a church that's out of power, or a school that's out of power, and you ask for the special, to send some crews to help us out, and they do it, they'll be remembering this
Honestly, it's
legislation.
not
We
just
think it's
Con
a
Ed,
pro
it's,
quo.
it's Verizon, it seems like it's Verizon more than Con Ed at this point. So it's really
Exactly, it is Verizon. That's-
them that we
that's
need
true.
to be
It's
putting,
true.
I think if we
holding to the
have a
fire.
church or
It is
school out
Verizon.
of power, I
It's
think
totally
Con Ed
Verizon.
will be there. I just,
Con Ed's been fine. Drive around, look around. All the poles are half poles. It's totally Verizon. We keep on calling saying Con Ed. I'm defending Con Ed. The truth is, it's not Con Ed. It's Verizon. Look at all the poles. They're all half poles.
So, to me, the bottom line is, I'm happy to engage them. Why wouldn't we engage them? But
I do think, I
Let's
think
It's more than lip
get,
service.
let's get
It's more than lip
Verizon.
service.
more than lip service.
Verizon is the one we should get in here. And maybe we could just pass it against Verizon also. Like, if I'm concerned about, not that it matters, I'm one person, but if I'm so concerned about Con Ed, we could just focus on Verizon. The fact is, most of these poles are Verizon, and they're not the ones that keep our lights on.
So, tell me, are we gonna adjourn this to give us
Yeah,
an
we'll give them
opportunity to
time.
take?
Yeah, I think we want to hear
So,
from them.
And I have Verizon.
yeah, so the next meeting is the 29th. After that, it's November 6th, the 13th. What are we thinking?
I'm
sorry.
Con Ed, give them 2 weeks.
What did you
Sixth?
say, November 13th?
I'm sorry? When?
I mean, 12th, sorry.
12th.
6th, 12th, 19th,
I guess it
November?
doesn't make a difference.
November
one.
19th?
For a meeting with Con Ed or for a
No,
continuation?
for the adjournment of a public hearing.
We have to keep.
I think realistically, closer to the end.
Yeah, do it
Yeah.
the 19th, so we have time to meet with
Yeah.
them and
But we do have to connect with Verizon.
soon, actually, Verizon, yeah.
I'll speak to April tomorrow.
And maybe remind her that, we consider their poles to be the half poles that they now own, whether they realize they own it or not. They may not realize that, how many of those there are. Tell them to drive around town. We'll be happy to give them a tour. No, I'm serious.
Then we would just need a motion.
Well, if we get one of them
I
up to
make a
drive.
motion to adjourn the meeting to November 19th. All in favor?
Second?
Aye.
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 Do we have a second?
It's a good team effort there.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was all out of order.
Do you wanna pass that out?
Wheels are falling off the bus here.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Sorry to keep you so late, guys.
All right, good night. Thank you.
What good news do you have for us, Bob?
Change
Hi.
orders.
Honking sidewalk
That's
joints.
great.
So, I'm doing that. Night.
Good night.
So, we just received from Leo from ELQ Industries a change order for the caulking. So this is the joints between the two sidewalk panels right now have a plastic spacer in there. What WSP did not include in their specifications was the caulk that goes in between these sidewalk panels that prevents water from getting in and cracking the panels.
Just because I've never done it before?
Who, ELQ
Yeah.
or WSP?
Either.
Is that standard? I mean, do you ever leave the plastic? I feel like I've seen
No,
that.
that's only temporary.
That's only ever temporary.
It's only
It's
temporary.
not-
Fortunately, WSP is still
Bob, I'm
just
sorry,
stated.
could you just move the mic? People at home can't hear you.
Jill just stated, basically, whenever you do that temporary cardboard in the middle, that will get deteriorated with the rain. So they put these plastic covers over it. Those are just strictly temporarily. Unfortunately, WSP did not include the self-leveling caulking, which is required to be permanent. So that's what this change order is about, to have the manpower to install it and tape it up and keep it intact, because if you don't, the water will get in between the concrete, and as you know, in the springtime with the freeze and thaw, it will just deteriorate the sidewalk. So it's critical, and it's weather dependent too, so it's important that they do it sooner than later, before the winter sets in.
Do they ever do this caulking when they install the sidewalk, or does it always come later? I mean,
Not this late, they usually should have did it when they were doing it, right after the fact.
They usually let the sidewalk cure, then they do the caulking.
Yes.
I mean, like, when did
Why
ELQ
ELQ?
notice that there was no caulking in this contract? Like, why does this come to us at the 11th hour like this? It's outrageous. I mean, for as much as WSP really screwed us, and they definitely really screwed us, and we have a long list of things we need to go after them for as much as that, ELQ needs to be held accountable for that. It shouldn't be coming at us with a $50,000 change order at the end of the project. It's ridiculous.
Yes, telling us that time is of the essence because winter's coming.
So
Right.
so
I
this
should
should
know about it
so is
sooner
this
than
is typically this has never been done to date?
Right.
That is correct.
And when did this first how many weeks ago or when the initial
Sidewalk
sidewalk
report?
went in? I mean, we're talking.
We've,
Oh, the sidewalk's been in for many, many months.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
the
right.
Bischoff
So-
sidewalk was put in last year.
Yes.
And we really shouldn't stop there either, because, what's going on with Boswell, that they are not noticing this either, Like, really, they're our project manager, it really should not fall on the town to think to themselves, oh, look, there's a piece of plastic between the sidewalks where there ought to be caulking. I mean, are we
Right, so
meeting
we
tomorrow
raised it with
morning?
them because we said, this plastic is cracking, it's, is it supposed to be there, isn't it supposed to be there, half of it's still there, half of it's missing. He's like, oh, that's where the caulking
Well, they
goes.
just told us
Oh.
that, maybe a week ago.
A week
They said,
ago,
"Oh,
we
that's
just tried to cover,
temporary."
because it was on our punch list
Yes.
of things that these plastic pieces, half of them there, half of them aren't there, they're cracked, they're missing. What's supposed to be going there?
Excuse me?
I said a punch list.
But why?
Yes, wow.
This caulking has never been on their schedule either. I mean, how long is this even gonna take?
It's not
They
gonna,
tell us a week of TNM?
I told Leo, I says, Leo, when you give us a change order for the town board, make it conservative. So when the town board approves it, we know it's gonna come in at least lower than what he shows. He shows basically 1, 2, 3, 4. He said it could take 1 to 2 weeks. He estimates there's about 14,000 linear feet of joints, which is a conservative amount. I don't think there's that much, so this
Bob,
estimate.
do you consider the caulking between the sidewalk joints to be something that needs to happen in order for ELQ to receive their sidewalk payment? Have we already approved their payment for sidewalks?
So let them. So what? Yeah, well, they should do this, and we can pay them when it's done.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's clearly their failure, Nick, I mean, I'm gonna ask you to litigate this now.
Right.
If it's clearly their failure, and it's something that in the regular course of business is done, and they certainly were aware of it because this has been going on, the sidewalks have been laid, why would we be paying them now? Do your job, and then when you're done, we'll pay you.
we'll pay them when they're done, but we have to approve the change order because this is out of their existing scope of work. And Bob is right, there is no choice but to approve this.
Well, but why should we be paying them?
Because there was no line item for it.
Because it was
WSP.
not
They,
in
they,
the
So
original.
the
they
event that they
finished the
didn't do it-
sidewalks and then came to us 3 weeks later and told us, oh, oops, we actually didn't finish the
So
sidewalks.
if they didn't,
Such
We
nonsense.
went to them, actually.
Such bad actors.
so in the event that it was not done because of their mistake and their error and their negligence, and our sidewalks had heaved and cracked next year, we would say, okay, you're losing the monies that you have sitting with us.
Well, no, because it was not in the scope of
It was
work.
not in the scope.
The
of
scope
And
of
as
the
long
work,
as it
but the
wasn't-
scope of
WSP.
work, but the scope of the work for ELQ is to provide us what it would be sidewalks
They
that
were-
would be whatever the standard and norm is for a sidewalk. They
No,
would-
I
it's
don't know,
not.
they
The
were
scope
building it
of
according to
work-
the plans and the specifications.
No, the
Look,
scope
hold
of
on, hold on,
work
hold
is
on.
very
Have you,
specific
hold on, have
as
you?
to means and methods.
Have you, in your experience, and I don't know how wide it would be beyond here, in your experience, does this always happen whenever sidewalk is put down? So in other words, the better question is, would ELQ have ever not put this down in the New York area, knowing that winter comes
I think
and
it's
water
highly
comes?
unlikely, and I agree with Ivy's point, where, why did they figure it out now when they put the sidewalk down?
Because we
months
raised
ago?
it with them.
Right, so their negligence,
they should
Nick,
have
what I'm
known.
arguing is,
Of course.
if this
I
is something
thought
that is
this he
standard
should
in the
have known.
practice of putting sidewalks, we shouldn't have to tell them to do it and point it out. We shouldn't have to go back to them.
But we should have to pay for it.
That's true, but let them do it and then we'll pay for it, if that's what we need to do.
But we have to
Well, I
approve the
think we
change
have
order.
we have a full discussion in executive session, but they're contracted to do the work that's within the scope of work.
Question.
But they're also-
Question, there are sidewalks that need to be repaired. So even if we, I know it's on the punch list, even if we approve this, are they going to fix the sidewalks before they do this, or is that gonna now?
Is there an extra change order for new sidewalks with joints that don't need?
Right, don't the sidewalks need to be fixed before they caulk it?
It depends
No.
where the sidewalk has to be repaired. If there's a panel they have to remove, and there's a joint there, they wouldn't put this in until they repair it. So they'll use their judgment on that, but they do have quite a few areas of
Yeah, Bob and I
sidewalk repair.
are meeting with Leo on Thursday
To go over the
to
punchless
go over
items.
those punchless
I mean, I don't
items.
know how you fix the sidewalks, I don't know if it means ripping up
No,
the
it's
piece or.
jackhammer. You remove the
Right,
panel,
so
and it
then-
has to be repoured.
Well, there's
I'm
two
saying they need
ways.
to use their
There's-
best judgments, not really.
There's two ways you can do it. If it's a small hairline crack, they get a blade and they just go along the blade line, the crack, and they fill it with an epoxy to prevent any water from entering it. If it's a big crack and it's judgment based on what we think, they remove the whole panel. So there's two ways to do it.
I'm erring on the side of removing the panel.
Oh,
Yeah, I just want them to fix it before they
No,
caulk, at least
yeah,
in
they
those
will.
areas.
Understood, but
because-
there's whole sections of Bischoff that were
Yeah,
done
that could be
2
fixed,
years,
yeah.
last year, that needs to be done. There's whole sections that are intact, so I'd like to at least,
I find it so suspect, because under the terms of their contract, aren't they also warranting their work? And so were they intending to warranty and guarantee the sidewalks that had this plastic between them?
Well, that's what I just was saying before, if this is the regular course of business, and this is industry standard and practice, why would they ever ignore it?
I mean, that means basically our design was subpar. So
Well,
they're
we knew that.
basically going according to the drawings and that our designs were flawed. So they would definitely have a defense on that front. But I guess my question to you is this $51,000, and I understand that your instructions were to come, make sure they have a bid that covers everything so that there's no surprises. But is this, caulking is not like rocket science.
It's not.
So
It's
my
labor
question,
intensive.
it's labor intensive, so my question to you is, do we want to give it to them, or do we want to give it to someone else?
We
Are they
can't,
our only option?
we'd have to then bid an RFP for it, right?
There
I
could be
think-
issues with the
You can
warranty.
go through another contractor, but if it's, above a certain amount, you have to go with the RFP, and it's gonna take that much time, and we have to get this in
And then to your
before
point,
the
Before the
winter
winter.
sets.
No, I understand, but
And then all of a sudden the sidewalk cracks, they're gonna blame it on the caulk.
But it would've failed anyway.
Fair enough, that's a
Potentially,
good
I mean,
point,
it doesn't make sense.
And I think Jeremy's point is that regardless of the scope of work and what was in the plans, there's an assumption that they're qualified to do the work and that they're going to raise these issues, and there's good practices that would be implemented during the performance of the work. And if this is so common that you put in the caulking, it's something that, if it's not there, can be detrimental, that they had an obligation, an implied
To
covenant
raise
of
it.
faith to raise it and bring it to your attention. Not doing so,
that's true.
that raises issues.
They should have picked it up, and they've done it on several occasions, but what they generally do is if they don't see it in the plan, they give the town, or they would send it to Boswell, John Keswick, and RFI, which they never did.
So, I'm sorry, just to go back to my question from before, we had established a milestone payment for them when all of the sidewalks were completed. Have we made that payment already?
I don't know, I'm trying to
If
see.
that check hasn't gone out, I think we should stop it immediately until this nonsense gets figured out. It makes me furious to think that we're paying them a milestone payment for the completion of sidewalks when they had this temporary plastic between them.
One would argue that's an integral component of the completion of the sidewalk, is the caulking that prevents damage to it.
I don't think one would
Right.
argue, it just is.
Right, yes.
It's kind of like if someone hires me to be the lawyer in court, and in my contract doesn't say I have to go to court, and I don't show, it's, one assumes
Well,
that.
I have a
standards are
counter
well.
argument, but I'm not gonna say it. One could also argue that.
So I don't
Let's
really.
not make our legal,
Yeah, exactly.
litigation arguments in
It's on this check thing.
this setting.
But I,
So I think we understand the concerns. I don't know if we can get the answer.
That's what they,
It's in this check
it's on
run.
the check run.
What's
It's
that?
about to be approved by the board. I'm thinking that
So
check.
then we're not
Why
approving
not
it.
get approved?
I'm a no on that.
We're not approving it.
Just found it.
And, and while we're at it, you drive down the street here, and I think I was saying to Lisa and Jill today, and it looks like someone just took, tar and went,
there were some
Yeah,
cases
and what
that-
I was saying, that it dips, the whole car bumps the whole way, and you could see today
Yeah.
the water
I was
pooling and
asking Leo
all of
about
the.
that. He wasn't quite sure
It's
how
like
that
waves.
developed. But that's where someone, I guess,
how much do we have of their
It's horrible.
money in what's the security that they have?
The retainage.
oh, the retainage right
10%.
now? I think we still owe them at least a couple of million. And when everything's all said and
Hold the
done,
10% back,
we
right?
keep
How much do we
5%.
have?
We keep 5% of the total. Even when everything's said and done, we pay out everything, we'd have about between 600 and 700,000.
I thought the retainage is
No,
found in
that's
years?
5%,
For how long?
2 years.
2 years.
No, basically the retainage is usually submitted until they submit the maintenance bond for 100%. and they do all the punch list items. So this monies will probably be held probably till next spring.
Well, we should look into I didn't notice it dipping. The unevenness, there's some sloping because of the drainage, but I didn't notice it dipping. We should look into that. And Jeremy is right, by the gazebo over there, this definitely looks like,
Even further down towards Town Hall.
this like, it's like, it looks, it's like, looks
I don't
like.
know how you spell that, but-
It looks like it just fell off the truck.
Just a pile of asphalt that just.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like-
It wasn't smoothed out. It looked like it fell off.
So where's that,
after
what
the
street is
fact.
that on, South Greeley?
South
Yeah,
Greeley,
it's like
between
from
the
gazebo and Town Hall.
There's really
But
no
the whole
reason
road
for the
is
waviness.
dips.
I mean, considering that we went the route and paid the money for the full depth reclamation, there's absolutely no reason that there should be these kind of waves. That was the
Right.
entire reason to do that, as opposed to just laying a, top coat.
Well, that is the top.
And look at
thing,
it
but-
tonight, because with the rain
Mhm.
and then the light shining on it, you can really see it.
Well, the most important thing we have to keep an eye on, and that's up to John too, and the town as well, and I'm sure Jerry's keeping an eye on it, is to make certain all the water gets into the catch basins. That's the most critical component.
At what point is one no longer the lowest responsible bidder? I mean, would you lay out, but I'm just curious, because,
Right.
because, if, with this type of shoddiness on the part of ELQ, at what point can a future,
They can't, because it was at the time of the bid award, and there's change orders, there's contingencies, so at the time of the bid award is when it's determined about reasonable. You
so,
can't
I mean, so a
award a
future,
bid.
so a future, a
Yes.
future municipality would be, for lack of a better term, stuck taking them if they were the lowest?
You know how they do it in Europe?
It would
How
be
they do the
some-
bids in Europe? They throw out the high, they throw out the low, take an average of the ones in between, and the one that's just below the average is the one they select.
Well, I've been to Rome, New York. and
That's almost
Greece,
where I
New
picked
York,
wine
so-
too. That's where I picked wine too.
Basically the same.
I just did the second above the lowest.
That's how everyone does it. I
Second
think that's
above
second above.
The second
Absolutely, that's it.
cheapest is the most inflated cost.
Okay, because I know that's
No,
how they
Sorry, you
if no
distracted
one
us.
wants
It's
to
like,
do
we're
the
looking pretty
cheapest
light.
one, they'll do the second one, and that's
That's
always
right,
the most
folks, and you got the
inflated.
town
Work in
board
Europe.
now debating how to
Okay,
choose
so-
wine.
So we're gonna approve this change order because we have to, and then we'll talk about the other payment of claims. So are we okay with that?
Okay, so
Yes.
we approve this, but, I mean, money's fungible.
Yes.
What we're gonna do is
Yeah.
not approve
We needed to get done.
payment. So do we need to adjust, does Christina need to adjust the payment of claims authorization?
It will reflect.
Yeah,
the-
you'll just
We'll
cross,
hold
it's gonna
the
be
one- the
as
one, yes.
amended.
So what, we don't need a dollar amount, we can just say, but
With the
withholding
exception
the
of, yeah.
ELQ payment, that'll
Yeah.
be fine?
There's only one payment to ELQ.
Yes. Okay,
So, yeah.
Two?
so let's start with just
If there's two
approving,
payments to ELQ?
Well, the one might,
Was
the
there a
one
second
might
one?
be just for the.
Two entries, that's what it looks like here.
oh, I only
So
saw
we'll
one on my
look at it
phone.
before we get to
Yeah.
that on your agenda.
Okay, yeah.
One might be the
I don't-
acceleration payment, the other might be a normal payment.
I don't have I don't have a hard copy of it, so I can see. Okay, that's fine.
Okay?
Yeah, so we'll
I can
approve this.
inform Leo tomorrow, this is fine.
Yeah. And then,
Thanks
the
for coming, Bob.
DOT pedestrian.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, it's
So wait, while you're here, the DOT pedestrian poles, the board's going to be approving tonight, the resolution so that we can put it in with the permits for the, rapid, blinking beacons.
Oh, the RFFBs out by
Yes,
Langs and.
by Langs and the North County Trail.
So what are the two locations, or the?
Two locations.
It's in the resolution.
There, one's by Langs,
Yeah, we actually have,
Okay.
there's a
the other one's
resolution.
by the
in
North
Mill-
County Trailway.
Okay,
In Millwood.
and 3 of them are solar, one of them is going to be hardwired.
Which one
So
is
does this
hardwired?
resolution
By the
mean
North
then
County
that
Trail,
the
because it's too
state
shady.
has
There's one
allowed
that's
us?
not
It's better that
So
way.
does this resolution then mean that you heard back from the state and they've allowed us to take over responsibility for this?
Allowed us, yes, they will allow us to take over
But we
maintenance.
were waiting to hear back from them, so you heard back from them.
Yes, that's absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
They're fine with us taking it
Uh-huh.
over.
But
Yeah.
do we have the
Paying for it and
poles yet?
installing it.
But it
and-
took them a long time to tell us they were fine with that.
Do we have the poles yet, though, or just?
Excuse me?
Do we have the
Do
poles?
we have the poles from TEPCO?
Couple are
Yes.
We did
temporary,
not order
right?
them yet, because we
Oh,
want to
this one
wait
is
until it's
breakdown
approved by the
Okay,
state.
yeah.
Right, okay.
We don't want to order the foundation because they might change it.
What's the
And then we
turnaround for the poles again? 4 to 6 weeks or something?
LVH and the poles.
No, these are not decorative, these are just the straight ones.
Straight short ones, these fluted ones were like 6 to 8, so this is probably be about 4 weeks.
Because with Amazon Prime, I get things.
Yeah, 2 days.
Do they have these on
I bet you-
Amazon Prime?
I bet they do. They definitely do, right?
Probably do.
I can,
Go home and have a life.
oh, good.
Yeah, goodbye. Thank you, Bob. Thank you. I'll see you
Okay,
tomorrow.
thank you.
All right, good night,
Thank you.
Bob, thank you.
Okay,
The meeting is Thursday, by the way, it's not tomorrow.
yeah, it's Thursday, yeah.
But then also-
Oh, it's Thursday.
Bob, the meeting is Thursday, the construction meeting?
Yes, it is.
Thursday.
Good.
o'clock.
I look forward to it.
8 o'clock tonight. Good night.
9 to
Night,
10.
thank
10
you.
to
Thanks,
11.
Bob.
Oh, no problem.
Okay.
Next is the authorization to declare old benches as surplus. So we have the old green and some of the black benches. We're just trying to figure out what to do with them. So we are going to ask the board to declare them as surplus. And I did speak with Jerry. They are between 10 and 15 years old, in varying states of disrepair.
Yes, some of them are very rusty.
Rust,
Right, so
yeah.
it sounds like they're obsolete then, and therefore they would have no value.
Right. So how do we dispose of them?
Do we ever given it to the Parks
You
and
can-
Rec if they want to take
So-
some?
Right, so you can either.
I mean, we did have the inquiry from the church.
Church, yes.
Regarding whether they could take them.
Right, and that presumably would save the town money from having to dispose of them, both for labor and material. And the controller's office recognizes that if you have something that is obsolete, has no marketable value, instead of paying to throw it away, if there's someone who wishes to take it, you can donate it to them, the town has that authority to do so.
I don't want to discourage this, trust me, but I'm concerned some of them are really rusty, and if somebody,
falls,
if,
yeah, if
with
they
the
fall.
moving, and if, God forbid, they're
They
not
can
stable
find
anymore.
something
Right, I was
when we
gonna say,
give it
we'll
to
do a
them.
bill of sale and a
Right.
release.
And a release.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's fine.
Yep.
Bill of sale for 50 cents, whatever.
Okay.
Or do we have to declare a specific price on any of?
Could be like the old
the
Yankee
50
Stadium,
cents
if
or
you
no?
wanna buy it, like, you sat there.
That's different. Yeah, I said.
It's not quite Yankee Stadium,
Yeah,
but
well,
Yankee Stadium
Hey,
seat.
electronic bids.
Actually, this seat's gonna be retired.
So Nick had floated the idea of allowing electronic bid submission, which evidently some other municipalities do. I passed it by my department heads, and they're actually a little concerned about it. They've got some reservations, so I think I'd like to hold it for a little bit. We checked with Elmsford, and they actually don't use electronic bid submission, is that correct?
Don't we always do them, didn't it?
Well,
Yeah,
so
but
the the concept is that right now requires that a bid be delivered in hand to the municipality.
Oh, yeah.
The law was modified to allow bids to be sent via email, because sometimes bids get delayed because the person gets stuck in traffic, FedEx driver is late. I've heard all those excuses, and the board doesn't have the ability, the town, municipality does not have the authority to waive that, especially because you're gonna open the bids. So this is just another way to guarantee that those bids would be in there, be received if sent via email.
What's the
I
negative
don't know, I
one?
don't have no problem with the by hand delivery by FedEx or whatever it happens to be, but my question is, do we require electronic submission as part of the bid package so that when it comes to digital filing, it's easier for them to digitally process the bids?
So New York State law says you have to adopt a local law so that you can receive the bids electronically. Right now,
Can we have
don't-
in our law both by hand and electronically?
Well, no, we couldn't. We could require that they submit a digital version that
Yeah,
gets submitted
digital
via
We already
hand.
do that.
So what are they concerned about?
Do that.
They're concerned, I get 200 emails a day. The people are concerned that either the spam filter prevents something from being
Yeah.
delivered, and we would never know about it.
Can we create an email that,
Is that Newcastle?
Yeah,
that
but
you-
it doesn't
you
mean
want-
that the spam
No, but
filter
then they'd have to
doesn't.
print it out, it's harder for them to
But-
compare the bids, I mean,
And it's
depending on
opened
the
at a certain
complexity of
time,
the
so it
bid.
wouldn't be a read receipt, so the person wouldn't know
Yeah.
that we received it. It just,
So
I would just like to see somebody else using it and having
I guess
success
it's not
with it
exigent.
before.
so
we
check
print
that.
these things out, like in other words, if they were electronic, we would wind up printing them out?
Yeah, because if it's a complicated bid, you need to actually read through it.
Right, and well, you can also require a paper copy, but
Right.
the digital one would be, whichever one gets there
Timestamp.
first would be deemed to be timely.
Right.
Well, I'm okay with that.
Well, let's see, if they have hesitation, I'm okay
Why don't
postponing
we
this,
vet it a little bit more and then we'll-
getting more information.
And you also then need, the procedural aspect also is that you need to have a mechanism in place that ensures that the bids are then kept, because bids are meant to be kept sealed until they're opened in public. So you'd have to somehow make sure that the email is received but not read, and that they all then get printed and read at the same time.
I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a mechanism to
Yeah,
do that.
right. As you said, a couple of municipalities have done that.
Couldn't by definition print it without opening it.
Well, couldn't you also have it
Right,
like,
that's what I meant.
Yeah, I don't.
it could be like password protected until like a certain time or
Yep.
something?
Yes.
Right. You can't
Recognize-
open it without the password until
Some
12
town
o'clock
has
on
already
Friday,
solved
whatever.
this issue.
Yeah, we just have to figure out what it is and just figure out how
And
they've
it
done
may
it.
be that
and-
people prefer to get hard copy, maybe bids under 5,000 can come electronically.
You could also
bids
do it
over
with your eyes
5,000,
closed.
You know, it's like.
Press
the
enter.
type of
But if we're
bid
printing it
that
out,
you
it's a waste of paper.
Next is authorization to accept a donation. We've received a gracious offer of a baby grand piano.
Yes,
Cool.
for
Chat
chat
pack.
pack, yes.
Nice. Do we test it to make sure it like sounds?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
I played
There's
on
no
it before,
inside.
not very well. It's not mine, but
No, actually, I'm really serious about that. Have we tested it? Because otherwise, disposing of a piano is actually incredibly expensive.
Yeah,
So.
we are having David Restivo from the orchestra
Okay.
go out and check it out.
Make sure it's good
And just
before-
make sure it works. It may, I mean,
It may
it may
require-
not be
yeah,
up to
yeah, yeah.
orchestra standards, so keeping that in mind, it's probably not what they would prefer to be on some awesome Steinway or whatever. But I think it's a good piano, and it's certainly better than the stand-up piano that we have there now.
Yeah.
So we're
When
gonna
is
let
he
David
checking it?
Restivo in the authorization
When is he?
be the
I have
arbiter
to
of
follow
whether
up
it's
with him.
accepted or not?
So
But
should
no,
we?
I think we should accept it anyway. I think it's in good condition, the people want to just
Then we
get out of
will
the
give them
house
a
'cause
letter for
nobody
a
uses
tax
it.
I know, but,
deduction,
but, but
right?
it would cost the town something to have to dispose of this, and David turns around and says,
This
this
is crummy
piano,
piano.
like, it's never gonna be right.
when can he check it? If he can-
Yeah, so if we
So
can
can
check
we-
it.
can we
yeah,
postpone
subject
it
to-
to-
Well, I
to-
wanted to make sure we discussed it first, but I'll confirm with the people who are donating it.
Okay, so
when
then,
they can come.
why don't we put it on for approval for next week, and
Sure,
that way
fine.
David will have, okay, that's great.
Stay tuned.
Or can we make it even easier, just make it subject to his approval?
Well, no, and let's hear back from him. What do you think of the piano? Because pianos are all
I said stay tuned.
different
Everybody here,
qualities.
Nick, say stay tuned.
That's
You say
fine.
stay tuned?
He did, Nick said stay tuned.
Yeah, what was it, off key?
All right, are we ready
Okay.
to move on to resolutions?
Resolution.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so don't do payment,
All right, so payment of
Don't
claims.
do that, we'll come back to that one.
Start with
All right.
number 2.
I move to accept the following monthly reports for September 2019, Town Clerk, Court Clerk, Development Department, and Receiver of Taxes.
second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move to authorize the return of monies for the water tap permit and subsequent road opening permit for the homeowner at 116 Orchard Ridge Road for a total amount of $2,860, including water tap 4625 issued on April 24th, 2019. Refund requested $2,110, and road open permit 2019-0005 issued on April 24th, 2019. Refund request $750.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move to authorize Newcastle Police Department's third training day of 2019 for a 3-day span for a total cost of $5,550, which has been included in the budget for 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move toward a bid to Hudson Valley Bus Company in the fancy little chart graph below for coach bus services for 2020 trips as per the rates shown below.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I move to authorize the posting and hiring of a secretary to the zoning board with the development department for a salary ranging from $56,365 to $77,184.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Resolved that the town board of the town of Newcastle hereby authorizes the installation of the town and assumption of maintenance responsibility, installation by the town, and assumption of maintenance responsibility for a total of 3 pedestrian crosswalk RFB warning light systems with 1 solar-powered system on Route 120 at the intersection of Poyland Drive and Walgreens Shopping Center, as well as 1 solar and 1 hardwired system on Route 133 and the North County Trail by Station Place. Be it further resolved, the town administrator shall direct the completion of this work and provide for the submission of all documents required by New York State DOT in relation to this project.
Okay, I'm sorry, there's
4, right?
There's 4,
Well, each intersection gets 2.
yeah. So,
There's
there
another
are 2
one at-
solar powered at 120 and the intersection of Polion and Walgreens. And then 1 and 1 at Route 133 and the North County Trail. So it's just 4 altogether.
So
Sorry about
moved.
that. Okay,
Second.
thank
All
you.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to authorize to add the old streetscape benches as surplus.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And are we doing the third one subject to David?
No, we're gonna
No?
wait, and I actually think I'd like to hear from Barton and Lug, we do check.
Judas, yeah, let's hold this one until we Judas.
Yeah, let's
Until
hold
we
up
Maybe
on that
attempt to
one.
do that.
Okay.
And then now we just have the last one, the payment of claims.
Judas.
With Judas.
For Judas.
Whatever. Easy for you guys to say. Well, where are we?
That's it, because we're.
Claims,
So
no, we have
so
to.
it would be an authorization to approve the payment of claims, except for the payment in the amount of $47,772.40 to ELQ, which is being held back and not being paid at
That's
this
it?
time.
And
What's
what's
the
the other,
relative
what's the
wash?
other
That's the
ELQ
acceleration
payment?
milestone associated with the sidewalk
That's what I
completion.
believe it is.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Can we double check that before we make that authorization?
Because it's the only one in here.
It's the only one in there? Okay, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No, it's a wash,
So
it's a
moved.
wash.
Second, whatever.
It's a wash for them. I mean,
Okay.
they get what they lose.
Motion to
And just a
adjourn.
motion to move into executive session?
Oh, executive session, sorry.
So
For
moved.
advice of counsel and other
Advice
stuff.
of council,
So moved.
personnel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
This is yours.
Thank you.